I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
Y'all got to see it. It's really good. You know who's got the hardest job tonight? Javier Bardem and his wife are both nominated. Now, if she loses, he can't win. He is praying that Will Smith wins. Like, please, Lord. Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. All right? That was a nice one. Okay. I'm out here. Uh-oh, Richard. Oh, wow. Wow. Will Smith just smacked the shit out of me.
Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth.
Wow, dude.
Yes.
It was a G.I. Jane joke.
Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth.
I'm going to, okay? Okay.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. What's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like right here on Black Power Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball, very happy to be your host. And I couldn't think of a better way to start this morning than with that. And as Chris Rock would go on to say, the greatest night in television history or something like that. The most shocking night in television history. Anyway, greetings, everybody. Welcome. Shout out to you. Look, I'm gonna bring him up here just real quick. In fact, let me just do that now. You all know what it is. My man, Too Black, poet, journalist, hood communist writer, editor, producer of Last Dope Intellectual, co-host of the Black Miss podcast right here at BPM as well. It's Too Black. Welcome, Too Black.
What's
from
up?
what a favorite edition of BPM, it's the Too Black, Not Black Enough show here that I mix what I like. Oh man, I don't even know what to say. I don't even have all I would want to say about the Will Smith joint is, if you're gonna put all of your family's life, if you're going to make all that part of the public discussion, if you're going to make all that part of what of the money you raise for, you know, of your professional, etc. And then you can't be that sensitive. And then what if it was The Rock, or as my man said, even if it was Kevin Hart, would he have done that? You know, anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was up too late because I was just laughing for about 2 hours. So it was classic. I mean, I got so many memes and screenshots and yeah, it was I found it to be very humorous. But so I mean, I don't. I try to stay out of the politics of it. For once, I really don't care about that. I think
I don't either.
I was like, this is rich black people fighting. Let them have their shit. I'm just gonna laugh. But yeah, I mean, I don't think he would have done it if it was, definitely not if it was a white man. I don't think, you know. I mean,
that's even better.
From what I understand, somebody I know that knows Chris Rock a little bit, he doesn't have a good understanding of body language. So this really was real when he had his hands behind his back. He didn't think it was gonna happen.
Right.
and then he just clapped him. I think one of my men said, like, we always knew Will Smith had a bad Ali impression. So that's what that was. You know, I don't know. That was
Chris took it. I mean, he didn't even stagger him.
Nah. I mean, I'm just saying, somebody is me. You're not going to turn your back and walk away without something there being a response. I
can't imagine that. Although part of me thinks Chris did well for international live TV, and that if on some level, as an older man, I can definitely now see it this way, that on some level it might be better to have just held off and do what Chris did and get back to the business, and like he'll I think in the long run he'll win off that. But I've thought about, I try to, it's hard to assess for me it's hard to assess how I would react in the moment, because I've surprised myself in certain settings in situations where I have done or not done what I thought would have been what I thought I would have done. But I just have a hard time imagining he would have just turned around and walked back to his seat. First of all, I can't imagine standing there, like you said, with I wouldn't have, once he walked up on stage, I don't think my hands would have been behind my back.
My right foot is planted, like I'm not, like I'm just not. Yeah, I don't know. That's different, but hey, I don't know. Yeah, anyway. I just know it was hilarious. And I refuse to let anybody inject some deeper conversation. And I'm just gonna keep laughing because everybody online, there's probably already a bunch of terrible think pieces as we speak that are being posted.
Oh, I'm sure.
Sure. Everybody likes to turn the celebrity situation into their deep analysis of patriarchy or black men or the carceral state or whatever. I saw all kinds of shit yesterday. White folks were saying he could have killed him, and it was an assault, and I will give Chris Rock credit. He did not file a police report. That was actually confirmed. The LAPD confirmed that. But I'm not saying.
But I even thought that.
Go ahead.
No, I just thought by the letter of the law, it is an assault. But I also thought that if it's witnessed in that way, that he wouldn't have to file something if they wanted to charge him. If that's how I've always understood it. Like if the police, if you see it happen, the police don't have to let the victim decide to press or not charges. They can say, I saw you commit a crime, and as a police officer, I'm going to arrest you. It would seem that, but I don't want that. I'm just saying I'm glad Chris didn't. But I mean, I think it is kind of crazy that yeah, anyway, I think that they don't have to wait for Chris to file something.
No, I think because this is where them being a celebrity makes a difference.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Because if it was you and I and we got in a fight and they witnessed it, it wouldn't matter.
Yeah. They wouldn't be like, Jared, do you want to file in the charge because he slapped you? You would have already, they probably just shot us both and kept it.
Yeah, it would have been. I would have been
I'm just confused.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm just confused.
I don't know. I don't know who started it, so let's just kill two birds with a million stones.
This is perfect right here. Oscar's too black. That's it. Perfect.
Hey. I wasn't even watching it, man. I was about to go to sleep.
I didn't even know it was on.
Everybody started hitting me up, and then I was like, wait, what happened? And then I got on Twitter, and it was just laughter for hours.
Well,
anyway, I had that much fun online. I had that much fun on Twitter in years.
Yeah, I haven't. This is definitely. Anyway, it's hilarious. I woke up to it myself. I just learned about it this morning and couldn't believe it. I was like, wow.
Yeah, I
don't have fighting stories. I've avoided more fights, and to something that I'll admit pains me to this day. I've walked away from a couple that I really wanted to have, and I don't feel good about it, even though I can say it was probably the right thing to do. I still wish it would have happened. So I don't have many fight stories. There's nothing exciting to tell. There's nothing exciting to tell. You know, so sorry. I don't know. Too Black. I don't know if you I don't know if you got one you want to share. I don't know.
I don't speak on that online. So
oh, okay, well, you know. Yeah, I mean, I just walk. I walk in peace, and I don't have. I avoid drama, man. That's my style. That's
no.
my
I mean,
style.
I'm not the type. I mean, without giving any details, I'm not the type to start nothing. But
Yeah.
I my thing is, I just can't. I think I can keep my cool, but I can't see a man slapping me in my face.
A slap in particular is just
turning their back and walking away. I'm sorry. I just, you know, that's the line.
I will say this: when I was in the Navy, we were in Paris, and I have never forgotten this. And we were on the Champs-Élysées, which I thought was funny because when we were on the bus, the tour guide. The French tour guide told us you could call it Champs-Élysées if you want to, because I don't think you can pronounce it right. I'll never forget he said that. Call it Champs-Élysées. We were like, the Champs-Élysées? We can say that, my man. Like, I mean, it's not that deep, your little French language. Anyway, but we're standing outside in a crowded evening, you know, and this white woman is just standing there in like a well-dressed white woman, and this other well-dressed white woman in a fur comes just walking out of nowhere and open hand mop. And unlike Will Smith and Chris, that woman dropped, and old girl in the fur kept walking. And we were all like, oh, I mean, it was like a pre-World Star. Oh, to this day, it's one of the coldest things I've ever seen. And we had no context. We don't know what happened. She just came out of nowhere. Mop! And that woman dropped, and I was like, whoa, this is like 30 years ago, and I'm still like, that was impressive. So yeah,
I've seen some fights, whether I was in them or not. I've seen some fights, you know. I mean, when I was big on when I was a kid, I used to start fights when I was like not me, but like I used to instigate fights. I grew out of this, thankfully. Like I would find two people in school, and I would go and I would tell them the truth, but I would start some shit, and they would go and they used to come to me to start fights. This is in like 7th grade. It was terrible. Like
terrible. Now he uses his words for good, everybody.
Yeah, I stopped that shit by high school, but at middle school, eventually it didn't work anymore because everybody knew what I was coming to do, so nobody believed me. But for a while, I could start fights with people. They wanted to see a fight, like I would just become like almost a fake promoter or something, you know, like.
so no, better yet, you are now using your words to encourage us into the fight we're supposed to be having.
Yeah,
you instigating the correct fight. So I know, look, so I started us with some nonsense. So
it was no getting around that, man.
Yeah, no, I was like, good God, oh my, I was like, that is the funniest. How you gonna? And they're gonna turn it into like 15 red table talks or something like that. It's gonna become a whole big. This is about to be. So it is. You're right. We should just enjoy this for what it is right now, because it is about to be turned into some online nonsense here very quickly.
They always go. You know, come out of fire fun. So, and then they're gonna, you know, like I said, they're gonna talk about somehow it's connected to police and prisons, and it's just gonna be. This is gonna be
yep.
lame. So I don't.
That's gonna be it.
I don't know, but yeah. So
James, you referenced that's one of my. I don't know if you meant this or not, but every time I hear that, I think of one of my favorite Cedric the Entertainer jokes, where during one of his intermissions, and the white people were coming back after the intermission looking for their seat, and found. I think he was saying some black folks had sat down and taking their seat, and he told, I don't know, I'm not doing it right, but he told a joke between the difference between black and white, as white people would say something like, "Oh, I hope nobody took our seat." And a black
I remember that.
Be like, "I wish a motherfucker would." Seriously, said, I'm from the "wish a motherfucker would" clan or whatever. Oh, I hope nobody takes our seat. I wish a motherfucker would.
Yeah, it's completely different.
Anyway.
Like, yeah. Anyway.
All right, man. So listen, you have been, as you know, all jokes aside, you have been again back at it, using your words to instigate the correct fight. And in fact, later on, we're going to be joined by Ware and Tio Brooke from the Journalism and for Liberation and Combat Conference or workshop. And that you and I both participated in. Ricky Ryan, who's in was also involved, and several others. They're going to come and talk to us a little bit about that next hour. But now you've authored. Oh man, you know what? And I put the thing in the wrong place. Anyway, I'll pull it up in a second. But you authored I think this is part one, or is this a part of a series?
It was part one. Part two should be up here soon, I think. But
okay,
part one, and then we also covered it on the pod too. So,
oh, you know, real quick, my bad. One more interruption. My bad. Apologies. I got to give a shout out real quick to, before I forget, farther, Ramiro Sebastian Funes, who runs the Unmasking Imperialism channel. Had me on yesterday. He does a lot of great work, and we talked about Thomas Sowell, which was hilarious and painful all at the same time. But he does a lot of great work, and I just and it occurred to me, I didn't the whole time we were talking yesterday, because if you see the get a chance to see it, let me pull it up here where you can actually see. The whole time we're sitting there, I couldn't think. I was like, who is he reminding me of? Right. I was like, who is Brother Ramiro reminding me of? And I finally figured it out this morning. It was two different people. One, he reminds me of the lead guitarist. I was thinking of Metallica. I was like, that was one. I was like, that was one. And then the other one was, I couldn't put it together. I was like, my man, that was one. And then the other one was the lead singer of Soundgarden, Chris Cornell. So I was like, the obvious one, somebody had said to me something about Jesus. And I was like, no, we know that, because that's obviously not what Jesus looked like.
Johnny Depp, maybe,
maybe Johnny Depp,
early days. I've been watching Johnny Depp.
Yeah. I got you. So anyway, but unlike those two, who I actually think are pretty talented, I've even liked a couple of the songs that they produced. Brother Ramiro is deep. He's sharp as all the knives out there, and does a lot of great work. And we had a really good time chopping it up about Thomas Sowell. And it's really the only way, again, that I can handle engaging that kind of conversation in media is in collectives and with a little bit of humor, because good Lord, these cats are out here trying to do, and really they're here to negate, as Mr. Porter says, to negate the negation that we are trying to represent, that is negating the nonsense and the propaganda being imposed on us. So that's how I'll bring us back to the work that you've been doing here, and this I'll call it for now a series that you started on Hood Communist, engaging prison history and prisoners. So let's start with a little bit of that. Let me go ahead and pull this up while you get us started, and then and I'll make sure, if I haven't already, it might already be in the show notes, make sure the link is there. But anyway, so talk to us about this series and this initial conversation that you've had.
First, I want to give credit to it's stories under my name, but it was a collaborative effort, because my co-host of Black Myths transcribed like almost 2 hours of conversation, and anybody who transcribes knows that's not especially when you're talking to somebody on the phone who's in a prison. That's not easy. So I want to make sure I give them credit for that. That
definitely
took just as much effort as it did, probably more than it did to interview them. But so there's a story in Hood Communist about this. That's actually about a different right. But there's a story in Hood Communist about this. That's just the story's fine. It was just I'm talking about the newspaper article. But
okay.
Story in Hood Communist about it, and then we just did on Black Myths It's on Black Power Media as we speak. Violence is not the answer, and that was to help. That's the myth for people who don't know about our show. That's a myth. We're not saying that violence is never the answer, but the myth is violence is never the answer, which has a funny ring to it, considering yesterday. But,
Will Smith don't agree.
Yeah, but you know, so the myth was that because it was a rebellion in 1985, February 1st in Indiana, what was at the time the Indiana Reformatory, now is the Pendleton Correctional Facility. It started with I'll give the simple version, and we could get into more of the good part 2 will be published this week. We can get more into the details of it, but the simple, just a kind of a general overview is there was a white supremacist gang. I'd like to start with this like immediately because this part this has never really made it to the public. There was a white supremacist gang called the Sons of Light. It's a guard gang. So it's not just a gang of prisoners. It was a gang of guards in the actual facility that were tied to the Klan. It was like a splinter group. And there's been a guard. There was a guard who worked at this reformatory at the time has confessed that this is what the gang was called. They talked about, I'll read a transcript later about like kids. The kids would play. They were so tight that the kids would play with their Klan robes. Like this is the gang. This is the group that was running the prison. So at the same time, you have these politicized group of prisoners who are organizing. So this isn't just a random thing. They're organizing and they're politicizing each other. And Lincoln Love, who was he was considered like a jailhouse lawyer, pretty well respected. And I want to make sure I say people's full names. Lincoln Love, or what they call him Logmar Abdul Wadhood Yazidi. So he was being targeted by the guards. And this was not the first time. This is just what started this particular rebellion. He was being targeted by the guards. They threw tear gas in his cell. He was shackled, and they beat him up with the club, until the club broke. And then after this, and this is one of the people that we spoke to. We spoke to Balagoon, John C. Cole, and we spoke to John Naim Trotter. These were two leaders of the rebellion. And this is what Balagoon says in the interview that when we spoke to him. So after they subdued him, handcuffed him, and shackled, then they beat him damn near to a pulp with a solid oak club. Once they beat him, they drug him out of the cell. When they drug him down the range for all the other prisoners to see. So they took him out of the cell after they beat him up with tear gas and drug him out in front of the prisoners to make an example out of them. And they basically started telling people, this is what's going to happen to all of y'all. So at this point, they take him to the captain's office. And Balagoon, who and he's the first person we interviewed. This is the one that Hood Communist currently is the Balagoon interview. Balagoon says the prisoners came, or the inmates came, and they were like, go get Balagoon, and they told him about what happened because he was already down there, I believe, trying to help, because he was also somebody who was like good, like for a witness, who could help people with their cases, and this is what they were doing. So he walks back down there to try to figure out what's happening, but then eventually he takes several people with him, and they go to the captain's office demanding to see him because they have him behind this curtain and they're still beating him up. So eventually it breaks out into a melee, and they start fighting with some of the guards because they start attacking them, and it was later revealed that the orders were to kill them. So they start fighting. They had to run down to the infirmary, which is a different area because Lincoln Love, the person again who had been beaten up, had been moved. They ran down to the infirmary demanding to see him. The guards start chasing them with bats. They said they got shovels and all of this. So to survive, they had to stab a few of them, take some of them hostage, and then they occupied cell block J in this prison. And then they released, and then they occupied it for I believe 15 or 16 hours. There's different takes on how long, but I think that's pretty much it doesn't really matter. 15 or 16 hours. The National Guard, the state police had to be called in because they had took hostages. One of them was the Indianapolis counselor, politician, several of them were guards or just staff that worked at the prison, and they had a series of demands about the conditions, demanding a minimum wage. I think in the article, I want to make sure I get that on record too, as far as what the exact demands were, because I think I put them down. They said,
yeah, I mean, well, Balagoon, you have quoted saying we had everything going. It was we brought them up as grievances and demands. We had everything you could think of: pay raise increase, more
Yeah.
recreation, better food. They were serving us pork practically every day. We wanted to have beets, turkey, and stuff like that. We brought up all of that. That pretty much they pretty much agreed to give us all of that.
right.
Look at the levels that they had to go to get something basic as that.
Basic stuff.
I mean, that is ridiculous.
A minimum wage.
Well,
a minimum wage.
I mean, and just to get some beats. I mean, anyway. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, man.
They said there's the end of censorship of letters and media, the ability to be politically active without reprisal, because again, this was an attack on that. And Trotter talks about in part 2 how this had happened to him prior. He said somebody grabbed him by his throat and said, "I'm gonna kill you, nigger." This is what one of the guards said to him. So it's like this was routine practice, and I made sure to underline that in the interviews that, you know, this was just what actually sparks this rebellion. It was not like, oh, this never happened before and we were just outraged. You know, that wasn't it. But yeah, minimum wage, establishment of grievance committee for prisoners safely to bring forward issues of DOC, threats and beatings and other punishments. So they were able to get some of those demands met, but at a cost. So John C. Cole, you know, also known as Balagoon, and then Naeem Trotter, the primary defendants in this case, neither one of them had more than 2 years left on their sentence. Trotter only had 3 months left on his sentence, and chose to get involved in this, as he says, to save a fellow comrade, right? So he chose to get involved in this. This is something we talked about on the show. How many of us would be willing to make that sacrifice? It's not to individualize it, just to really think about what struggle means. So he gets 142 years for this when he only had 3 months left, right? And then John C. Cole gets Balagoon gets 88 years. And I don't remember the exact amount of years he had left, but again, both of them had no more than 2 years. So imagine you're going home soon, you know, and you get hit with that. Like, that's just, you know, and that's why they're still there, you know, as is Lincoln Love. That also, none of them has been released to my knowledge. Obviously the two of them haven't, but Lincoln Love hasn't been released either. And again, there was an organization called the Black Dragons that they talk about. Trotter talks about this, and they had been organizing in the prison. So that's what they talk about. Once they actually occupied the cell, he's like, we had to watch the guards. We had to make sure that none of our people tried to kill the guards. Not because it's like we weren't going to treat them like they treated us, and we also understood that if we killed the guards, they were going to massacre everybody. It would be another Attica, right? So, or worse. So they chose not to do that. You know, they said they even let one out, I believe. But so they had to negotiate. They called the media in, and similar to Attica in that sense, you know, you had those mediators or whatever, and they were able to negotiate something down. Now, this story just kind of disappears from memory. Like, there's no conversation about it here in Indiana. I just learned about it because I went to a protest last year, and there was a group that called IDOC Watch, stands for Indiana Department of Correctional Facility. They basically just watch the Department of Corrections. So they're part of a larger prison movement that's going on. They're like the outside wing of that. And they had told me about the political prisoners in Indiana. You know, being on Black Power Media, just being in the circles I'm in, obviously I hear about political prisoners all the time. And I know about a decent amount of them. But, you know, I honestly have to admit, I was ashamed. I did not know about this particular story, you know. So I wanted to, like, as soon as I learned about it, I wanted to figure out how I could get that dispersed out to the public, because here in Indiana, as well as by and large, people don't know about this. You're on mute.
My bad. Thanks. So I guess I was just going to ask, how do you all see this in relationship to, well, I mean, you've really already answered it, but the broader situation of prisoners, of political prisoners. I just kind of got stuck for a second. I lost my train of thought, got stuck on that question of that what would you do?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, again, I don't know. So my bad. I just lost my train of thought. I was just got the 3-month thing, and then and because I could just very easily see any scenario happening.
Yeah, I don't think
I'm not
any of
messing
us.
with it. I got to get out. I'll help you more on the outside.
Yeah, I
Or
don't.
in the heat of the moment. Let's go.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think any of us. I don't think any of us know.
Yeah.
I think that's why I know we
No,
always
I know.
we always like to emphasize organization. I think that's where this really shows up, because what part of Indiana? Well, this is in Pendleton, Indiana. The situation we're talking about. I'm in Indianapolis, but I think the organization. Yes, it was. What up, Coco? Yeah, Prison Lives Matter rally. But this is part of organization, right? So it's like, I don't know if it's sporadic and you just throw us into the mix. I don't know, but if you feel like you've had a responsibility to people up to that point, I think it's easier to see yourself being willing to respond that way, because again, they had already been organizing. Like in part 2 on our podcast, where we talked to Shaka Shakur, and he talks about the prisoner movement throughout Indiana and the country, and he talks about how when you came in. And even Balagoon talks about this a little bit, like people scooped you up and gave you the education early. So Shakur is talking about, he was reading about dialectical materialism and reading all the classics and Fanon and all of this in like 18, 19 years old, because there was already a group of people who scooped him up. So if you think about, if you're part of that movement and something goes down, then it makes more sense to want to be to respond that way. It's almost not even a question. But if you just drop most of us out on the streets, to just drop us there, and if we're not part of any kind of ongoing movement, more likely we're not going to do anything, especially if we got 3 months. I don't think most of us would. But I think Indiana, I learned, and I'm still learning. Like, I want to say that there's people who can speak on this much better than I can. I'm just trying to help push the story. Indiana, from what I'm learning, had a large prison movement that was connected to a bigger movement, that was politicizing prisoners. So what they started doing, and Trotter talks about this as well as Shakur, is they started building these SHU units. And for people who don't know about SHU units, that's security housing units. It's just basically solitary confinement. And these SHU units they started building them in the early 90s. In other states, they had built them even more. And these SHU units, no matter what state what we're talking about across the country, is just a form of counterinsurgency. So they built these SHU units to lock up the most politically active prisoners, because their message was spreading across prisons. First, they tried to break them up and put them in different prisons, but like Shakur talks about, that actually blew back, because now more people are getting to different places and being able to spread the message. So they start breaking it up. They start promoting more of the street activity and the more kind of reactionary behavior to help disassemble them. And another point I want to make about SHU units, Ruth Wilson Gilmore talks about this. SHU units originated in Germany. Today we're trying to get rid of the Red Brigade. This is a communist group. Germany didn't have a death penalty. So they built SHU units to induce death, because they just couldn't kill them flat out. Like, that's the origins of SHU units, right? So when they say they're going to build SHU units to try to deal with, the prisoners or whatever, again, you have to see this as counterinsurgency or just a slow sentence to death. Trotter talks about being walked around in leashes, within the SHU unit, leashes that are connected to your hands and your legs. So this is the type of stuff they were subjected to, just because they chose to rise up, and that's why we like to call these things rebellions. I mean, I don't have a problem with the term riot. I'm not one of those people that think that's a bad name. But this is a rebellion because they didn't just tear shit up. They actually took over, temporarily took over the prison, and had the world's attention.
The only reason I think it's important to draw the distinction is because the zeitgeist in pop culture conception of riot is to diminish what the people are upset about and what their demands are. So it's that would be my only reason for wanting to make a comment on it. Although I don't know.
Yeah, I think and what's the book? Riot, Strike, Riot. John Clover draws a good segregated housing units. That's another name for it. You also just security. But they do call it segregation. That is true. Within the prisons, they literally call it synonym to segregation. But with the riots and rebellions, I mean, there's different definitions. I think for me, John Clover does a good job of really documenting how, riots have a real function to them by themselves. And sometimes we try to show it's something else, but it's like, it's okay to just riot as well. That's all I'm saying. But rebellion.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm just talking just in terms of the popular concept.
I think they turn it into monsters who are just tearing up their neighborhoods and all of that kind of thing. And then I think John Lee Boggs, John Boggs and Grace Lee Boggs, and James Lee Boggs. They do a good job of breaking down the definitions of these things. Whether we're talking about rebellion, revolts, like they do a good job of showing how there's different levels to it. And then that's because their point is argue about revolution. How revolution is different than those things. But either way, yeah, I agree. They do try to reduce it. But go ahead.
No, I just wanted to ask. The only thing I got left on this is a question about any updates on or sort of contemporary manifestations of the Sons of Light gang, cop gang or guard gang that you talk about here. Is there a discussion of a rebranding, of a more secret formation, or does it not matter just because the institutional abuse is more or less the same? Or is there more coming on that in future parts of this series?
I mean, honestly, we're just at a point from the people I'm talking to, where this has not been published anywhere other than on IDOC Watch's site. There's been no conversation because they knew about it obviously for a while, but the deposition, this is where this came out. A guard actually talks about this in a deposition, and I'll read it. And it was like a 150-page deposition, and this was a guard who formerly worked there. And he said they asked him the question, "Are you aware of any racially motivated groups that any of the guards belong to?" He said, "Sons of Light. And what do you know about them? As a group of lieutenants, captains, sergeants that belong to this, that use this KKK literature and the same type of rituals. They are a splinter group. They're not affiliated. They don't pay dues. It's developed solely for intimidation. What's their purpose?" And he says, "Well, they hate niggers. They hate Jews. They hate Catholics." And that's what was explained to me. He said, "Who explained it?" "Well, Lieutenant Burke, which was the Reverend. He recruits." He's like, "Excuse me, the Reverend?" "Yeah, the Reverend is the man who he'll talk to you about joining the Klan. He's a Reverend of the Sons of Light." "Yes." "He's not the Reformatory Reverend?" "No." And they say, "Go ahead." Then they have somebody called Captain Sands. "Our children used to be babysitted by this and play with his Klan robe. He carries a card. He's involved in it. That's the captain, which is over all the captains of the institution. And then you have now Captain Jackson, which is involved in a Boga film, which Captain Sands took over there to take for the group. We're trying to obtain a copy of that to get to the press." It says the Boga film you're referring to is a film that was on news and another beating. "Yes, the film was the one on news beating of another inmate. It shows the inmate is there cursing, cussing, calling people mothers and everything else, refusing to come out of the cell. And they took this film so they could just go in and obtain the inmate that's in nude in his cell, remove him by shooting him with gas, and then go into the club and go and club him." Like, this video was taken similar to the Ahmaud Arbery situation in a sense of this was taken for fun or as a form of recruitment, and then it got exposed. Sometimes these people actually film these things, Now that was a separate case from the rebellion, but this is to show like how this group was always like doing shit. Now this deposition was done a while back, but it's just now coming to light, no pun. So we're just trying to get it out. So we don't know who's stayed in, but DOC in any place, particularly in Indiana, is a tight group, and these people move in and out of of this group all up throughout the state, and they talk. So even when we come back to Trotter or Balagoon, like they're really well known within the DOC community. They label him, particularly Trotter is labeled as this notorious criminal, and he talks about how he couldn't even get released. He says in his interview that we're putting out on Black Myths this week, he talks about how he said that they actually told him, and I believe like a parole board told him, we can't let you out. They're like, we believe you're reformed. We believe you have rehabilitated. You are a good citizen, but you would be better served to be a role model to the prisoners than to be let out of prison. This is what they told him. So they're like, we can't let someone out who stabbed a guard. And I want to say one more thing on his case. His case was actually vacated in Madison County, Indiana. And they removed the judge, brought in another judge, and then resentenced him to 122 years. So we're currently trying to get some type of like he had a clemency hearing, but they haven't responded back. Balagoon, from what I understand, he didn't even I don't believe even thought that most of this was going to work. So he didn't go through this process as much. But both of them were like, the demand at the very least is a clemency, let alone any other kind of reparations or anything else. But it's clemency of both of them. So yeah.
All right. Wow. So, well, first of all, I appreciate that you and your crew in Hood Communist are doing this work. This is fantastic, and I need to get caught up myself. And anything, obviously, that can be done to help you all get the word out, I'm down with. So appreciate that. I think you're going to stick around because we have Brooke and Jared Ware are going to jump on here in a few minutes to talk about this journalism for combat and liberation, which relates very well, both in purpose and in need, to this conversation that we're starting here. But quickly, if I can, I'm going to first. We need to take a quick commercial break. So I'm going to ask Two Black to step out for a quick second. We're going to take a quick commercial here at I Mix What I Like in Black Power Media. Because we have a new sponsor that I want to happily announce and encourage you all to support. And that sponsor is, of course, ourselves, the only people who could ever sponsor us. So please go to blackpowermedia.org and get yourself some fly new merch and support the channel. There's all kinds of stuff that you can get. Obviously, all the basics, your tees, your hoodies, your mugs, all that kind of stuff, and make yourself just a little bit more fly in your daily operation. Shout out to Gangstar DJ Premier. And real hip hop heads who get that reference, and help out the channel. So go ahead and do that, blackpowermedia.org, and get you some of that hot new merch. And then real quick, there are a couple other things, before I bring everybody back up that I just wanted to quickly mention before I forget. And then after we finish with this next conversation, I am going to stick around. I think I'm going to be able to stick around because we're going to talk about and they're welcome. They're welcome to stay for this if they want. But we're going to talk about an extension of these discussions about journalism, liberation, combat, etc., and so forth, in sort of a reflection, as some of you have reached out and been alerting us to about the closing of the Black News Channel, and specifically Roland Martin's assessment of the closing of the Black News Channel, which is what I would like for us to discuss, because I think it importantly situates what we're doing here at BPM, etc. All right, so that's one thing. The other thing is I'm late to this, and I would want us to talk about it at some point. So I'm just going to start throwing. I want to throw out a couple of these things. One, Pusha T versus McDonald's. So I'm just going to throw that out there, just something to come back to. More from Killer Mike on with my man at Comedy Hype, Pierre, down there in Atlanta. I think they were in Atlanta. Fascinating discussion. We need to come back to that. We're going to continue to follow the Jaleel Muntaqim issue, as specifically his what was supposed to be visit up to Brockport, SUNY. And shout out to Manny Nile and Monty Lawrence. I believe, I think she's still in the chat, but the latest is that they're making it virtual, so there will be no live in-person potential for ruckus and raucousness, which is, Community Movement Builders is going to be publishing the statement that I brought up the other day from Daruba bin Wahad in response to the Jewish News Syndicate, which is I think poor branding for a number of different reasons, but and their argument against why Jaleel should be allowed up there. And it relates, it relates just quickly to, I just was digging through my library and my extensive library, and found my old, speaking of the Jewish Syndicate news service, The Jewish State by Theodore Herzl, and was interested in just the clarity that was used in discussing what his interests were for his defense of Zionism, which is of course the argument that Daruba is bringing up as to why there is this critique against the Black Panther Party, the Black Liberation Army, and Jaleel Muntaqim's arrival there. And the point that he says, in fact, in defending why the Israeli state should be placed in Palestine, though he had several options, he says that if His Majesty the Sultan were to give us Palestine, we could in return undertake to regulate the whole finances of Turkey. We should there form a portion of a rampart of Europe against Asia, an outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism. Let me read that part again. We should there form a portion of a rampart of Europe against Asia, an outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism. We should, as a neutral state, remain in contact with all Europe, which would have to guarantee our existence, end quote. So that was just one little part I thought was of relevance in terms to why anti-colonialists, anti-imperialists would be concerned and have a critique about the Zionist project, as opposed to Jews or Judaism. But the politics of Zionism, as expressed there by Theodore Herzl, are pretty clear as why there would be some concern there. So I just wanted to throw that out there real quick. I'm continuing to read Shelton's book on modern monetary theory, and have a lot more I want to start to say about that, as well as it relates to the myth of Black buying power. Big shout out to Black Alliance for Peace for their incredible presentation that they delivered to some of my students, and all of them will see it eventually this week, about the militarization of Morgan State University. It was a fantastic presentation that did all that we would expect be done from Black Alliance for Peace in connecting the dots and showing how what happens on our beloved Morgan State University and other HBCU campuses is directly related to the oppression of Black people here and the world majority around the world. In big news, Bumpy Knuckles is back with a new album. Go check it out on Bandcamp, an album he produced featuring a whole bunch of other MCs. I've heard it at least one time all the way through, and there are at least first of all, it's just good to hear some good boom bap again from my favorite, one of my favorite MCs and producers, and my favorite rap name, Bumpy Knuckles, aka Freddie Fox. So shout out to him. Go check that out. Please also go check out DJ Premier's, if you haven't already, So What's Up series, where he breaks down his production method behind so many of the classic beats that he has obviously produced, and the stories are fantastic. My favorite producer of all time. It's a great series. And we heard some of that on Sundays last night with the Ear Doctor, which is something more of you should be tuning into on a weekly basis, because it's one of the best hours, not only on our channel, but in all of these YouTube streets, because Ear Doctor we have a lot of fun with him, you know, jokes and such and whatever with pronunciation and politics or whatever on the remix. But when he's on them turntables, he is fierce as I don't know what. He had his partner there with him last night. The name is escaping me. Please forgive me, because it was a great duo DJ, back and forth, B-sides only, supposed to be. You can see for yourself if they stayed to it. It was just great. So definitely check that out. And that's it. So that's it. So let's get back. Let me take a quick transition, and then we're going to bring our guests back and get back to the business of hand here at I Mix What I Like right here on Black Power Media. So definitely don't go anywhere. And in fact, you should be reaching out and get somebody else to join you for this boom bap breakfast.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
All right, good people. So a couple of weeks ago, our guest reached out and said we are putting together a workshop that is meant to help us, my framing at least, my interpretation, help us better organize our efforts ideologically, where I think we're most pretty clear, but practically speaking, in terms of how we work our journalism and media work, primarily in service of liberation and combat. I'm of course talking about our crew here, Brooke, Jared Ware, and Two Black, who was one of the participants. We've asked him to go ahead and stick around. But Brooke and Jared, please, tell us a little bit about what was going on. Forgive the inappropriate, insufficient introduction. Brooke, let me start with you, in fact. Tell us a little bit about where you're coming from, a little bit about how you've come to this, and then what was this Journalism for Liberation and Combat workshop that you and Jared led the way in putting together. Jared, of course, with Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. But Brooke, go ahead, please.
Hey, well, thanks for being on and inviting us. The seminar series essentially came about due to some of the work that some of us groups that do prisoner solidarity work are networked and help each other out, and kept running into severe problems in terms of just general informational strategies, in terms of getting media, in terms of getting coverage. And within the prisoners, movement, these issues are intensified, as it does with like many issues, whether it's surveillance or organizing or basic conditions. Everything that being organized on the outside, basically like multiply that intensity and repression by a factor like 5 or 10 on the inside. But when it comes to prisoner resistance and rebellion and organizing, or just basic resistance, which takes any number of forms, on the inside, what's incredibly crucial is that people know about it, and that it's covered, and that the outside knows. And Jared and I worked together in the 2018 prison strike, which was a kind of fluke media success in the way that was picked up by mainstream media. And a lot of the issues with mainstream media, with media coverage, with trying to get both political prisoners and so-called social prisoners, quote unquote, are incredibly difficult to be covered or covered well in any meaningful way. And that they're, in addition to them receiving scant like realistic attention. They receive attention and they're heavily like mythologized, and like, the word prison will show up a lot in news stories, but it's covered within like a certain mythology or trope.
Brooke, real quick, forgive my interruption, but please, if you would, because you've made this point, and I wanted you to highlight it. But if you would, and again, I apologize, I didn't have a proper bio set for you or for Jared, or for that matter for Two Black either. Apologies to all of you. Could you just give us a little bit of your background and how you come to all of this? And if I'm not mistaken, you are coming to us from Oakland.
Yeah.
So appreciate you getting up extra early, but tell us a little bit about that. But then this piece that you said that I actually had not really thought of in this way until I heard you say it in the way you said it, which is that we, in these spaces, we may hear more about political prisoners than we hear just about prison and prisoners in general, which I thought was a compelling point. So please, sorry again for that interruption.
Oh, no problem. I'll take a step back. Like, I come to organizing, I don't know, like there's no epiphany or kind of road to Damascus like parable, like defining like how I came to this work. But I've been involved in any number of movements, and the journalism and media question keeps coming up in all of them. In the last 6 years, I've been primarily involved with the prisoner solidarity movement, like that came about in the 2016 National Prisoner Strike. And at first, we were members of the Incarcerated Workers Organizing Committee, and our crew here out in Oakland Abolition and Solidarity, has gone independent since then for various reasons. But we essentially are doing solidarity work, and we don't consider ourselves advocacy workers, but we're primarily made up. We're made up of a mix. Like half our crew has been locked up before or had people locked up, and I'm one of those people that has family inside. So although like when I started the work, I didn't, but so essentially like that's what our crew does. Like, and we can talk about what that work is, but there are some big events there. Like we mentioned the 2018 strike and the 2016 strike, and these really threw into sharp relief like the media problem and like the present state of media. Because on a daily basis, like we run into this organizing with people on the inside all the time, and just like prisons work in terms of the way they like disappear people and invisibilize people. And there are various reasons why it's incredibly difficult to even get like sympathetic people to pay attention in a real way, and that it's detached. And there are like structural, real ideological reasons why not. Like, and we have to kind of discern in terms of like kind of media arena in which, when we're talking about how difficult it is within liberal like media, which I consider mainstream media. It's easy to get a prisoner as victim story placed, because that's the way in which imprisoned or a colonized person, or someone that's been through the system, that they're only legible as victim, as a like receptacle of suffering, by which you can basically enact your own savior complex on top of. In terms of being covered well, it's incredibly hard to get that kind of media to recognize prisoners as capable of agency and of actual resistance, and as like a full human being. So that's essentially what I was talking about when I was mentioning how hard it's actually to get like real coverage of stuff that's going on inside. Like if you set a Google News alert for like prisoner, like in the story, you'll get a lot of hits, but it'll basically be as baggage, as basically a very two-dimensional, mention in the story. Or it's basically a story about the pigs. It's basically a story about the prison, which mentions prisoner. Never anything realistic. Or it's a feel-good story. That's also a story that gets placed a lot. Here's a picture of a prisoner like petting a dog, or organic gardening, or like at San Quentin, at these boutique prisons that are maintained, where like usually near a major media center and near a major center of nonprofits. These prisoners get loaded up with programs for basically held out as rewards for everybody who obeys and who's low security, but also to run a smoke screen, you know. So like those kind of stories get a lot of play, but in terms of like realistic coverage of what actually goes on, not at all. You know, not at all.
And so Jared, how does that sort of ground or base laid by Brooke fit into the specifics of this? I got to get the language right. The workshop, the series, the
we use
seminars,
yeah.
seminars. There it is. I was looking at the page again. The seminars under the banner of Journalism for Liberation and Combat. How does that basis fit into why this was put together?
Well, so that is in many ways the why, right? So the reality is that we recognize that broadly speaking, struggles for liberation are not going to be presented in a positive light or on their own terms within mainstream media, or what we call pig media in the course. So that necessitates that we have to have autonomous infrastructure, as you pointed out in course one, Jared, you know, with George Jackson, right? And it also necessitates what Two Black and You were talking about earlier today in that episode of Black Myths podcast, which I checked out, you know, the other night, which actually, I mean, it's a great example because IDOC Watch, which you mentioned, Two Black is like bringing it to your attention, is, you know, I don't know if they're an affiliate, Brooke, but they're basically, they do engage in similar type of work around prisoner solidarity.
Yeah, they're part of our network.
Yeah. So, you know, there's a lot of, I mean, that's just that wasn't intended at all, right? But it's kind of organic symmetry in terms of some of the types of things that we're talking about. And a big piece of it too, just to talk about that Black Myths episode again, is like, you know, you feature prisoners that were engaged in this struggle, who are still locked up, who are politicized, who are talking about things on their own terms, right? And I think that's similar to the approach that I've tried to take with Jailhouse Lawyers Speak over the years, is just basically, you know, as much as possible getting out of their way, right? Like, you know, and it's not like giving voice to the voiceless. They have a voice, right? But it's just like, hey, like, how can this infrastructure be leveraged and they can use it, you know? And I think, and then on the outside for us, then the question is like, okay, how do we show up and how do we make sure that by them using this, that they're not further put in harm's way, or that we're galvanizing folks to support them, get behind them, you know, listening to what their current needs, demands, et cetera are, right? And being, you know, if anything, maybe a megaphone, right? On the outside, or like, I mean, similar to what we were talking about with The Wire, which was a concept that came in at the Newswire, right? It's like, how do you get this information out through multiple avenues? And so, I mean, that's a small piece of it, because we're not just thinking about prisons with this, obviously. We think that that's a broader context for really like how any radical leaning social movement has to basically operate in terms of media. And we're not saying like you strictly have to abstain from participation in media. We understand that coverage brings a certain degree of visibility, and at times that's necessary, particularly on like a local level. But we are saying that like you'll never get the real it's basically the media's representation will be a form of counterinsurgency against your movement as well. So you have to be ready for that and understand that you know, being able to present things on your own terms has an incredible political value to your struggles, even if it's a smaller audience that you're reaching.
So just quickly, because I've just now finally done what I should have done, obviously earlier. We're talking now with Brooke Terpstra and Jared Ware. Brooke was and is a member of the 2018 National Prison Strike Media Team, currently organizes with Oakland Abolition in Solidarity, an autonomous crew dedicated to prisoner solidarity. And of course, Jared is co-host and producer of Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. He was a co-founder and former producer of the Beyond Prisons podcast. He was a member of the 2018 National Prison Strike and I'm assuming you meant media team as well there.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Media
media
team,
team
and
as
has
well.
written multiple articles on prisoner movements, repression, and organizing. So you both in your presentations talked about the experience around that 2018 prison strike and the journalism. Similar to what Two Black is working on now, seemingly is an attempt to get coverage of what has happened and is happening within prisons as people try to struggle for survival and some level of improved conditions. What happened in that 2018 strike as vis-a-vis the media and the press that you saw that was part of the impetus for this seminar that you all put together?
Well, it was a fluke. We had experience in 2016 with like how much media coverage we got, and this was essentially a media response to a really broad and kind of national level push to organize, support. And it the amount of coverage and interest we got in 2018 was like of a completely different order. It was like massively more like interest for a variety of reasons, whether it be novelty or a certain state of the media at that point. It was during a certain period when mass media was desperately trying to catch up to like a millennial audience, and basically watching certain news sources basically pick up stories, whether it be like radical press or revolutionary press. And that's where we would typically get coverage. So these bigger outlets would pick up the stories from these smaller, like more radical news sources. But we were basically deluged with an onslaught of like media requests. And so we had already like done a good bit of preparation, and had a media strategy in place. And I mean, the media strategy in place was essentially the only one we had, which is like basically build interest from below, like set the narrative with friendly sources that we share a certain relationship with, set the narrative and like build upwards and kind of exploit that tendency of larger outlets to basically scan and steal from smaller outlets. That was outpaced by basically the mainstream media being on its own trip, in terms of utilizing and like taking the story and using it for its own purposes. So we scrambled and basically trying to provide people. We didn't have enough people to do video appearances. We could have used more. We basically, when we maintain a certain flexibility with our organizing, because we know we have to respond when things pop off inside. So I can go from like, putting in 3 or 4 hours a day to putting in 12. Because like when shit happens, it happens. Like you have to respond or like you lose the moment. And that's what happened. Around the clock, like I'm constantly on the phone, like somehow trying to work a day job and like, keep my job, and like also like doing interviews on the bus, like via my phone. And but like we kept running into these problems. Like no matter what we would say, like certain aspects of what was being done would not penetrate, no matter how many times you reiterated it. And it's like, okay, like this is basically learning through experience, like what we intellectually knew already. Like the mass media is on its own trip. Like it reaches for stories that it basically casts you in their script that they've already like created. And you also had even with sympathetic outlets that came more with questions than with demands, they still like certain things were illegible to them. They could not understand. We kept getting they could only focus on the labor aspect and not the broad platform. Essentially inside the coalitional organizing inside to develop this platform of like 10 demands was incredibly sophisticated and basically offered something in the abolition movement, something it didn't have at that moment, like a broad all-reaching platform to basically address every aspect of like life inside and part of a plan, but that was completely missed because all they could focus on was the demand about labor. And that's also due to the ignorance, within the United States. They think slavery was just about forced labor, which it is not. It's about much more,
So
like what else? Like there is any number of other things going down.
You said that certain things wouldn't penetrate. Is that what you're discussing right now? Like, what else wouldn't penetrate ultimately? Like, no matter how much you push.
That prisoners organized this and we responded.
Mm-hmm.
We kept like, and like it was there in the record, like in the media, like Jailhouse Lawyers Speak, the principal like coordinating body inside, which is a clandestine network, 100% incarcerated people that developed, and like they were issuing their own statements. We responded, but yet in terms of in the structure of the stories, it was the outside that was always labeled as the progenitors, the organizers of it. They could not conceive of people locked up like doing this thing of like being active in their own like liberation at all. And I think that's due to a variety of reasons, like the heavy mythologizing, like and the liberalism of basically the prisoner is just basically an object of suffering, you know, and also basically the unwillingness to like basically a lot of the things that could not be admitted were basically portals to admitting a whole different worldview. Like if you actually admitted that prisoners had agency and like resisted on their own behalf and were capable of this level of sophistication, you would have to like many of these people would have to completely rewrite their worldview about everything, you know, because basically to count any one of these points is basically to challenge the whole.
Right.
Yeah. I also just add like, so a component of JLS's media strategy, right, which we were working, really closely with them in terms of thinking about this stuff too in advance, and was that like their rationale was more mainstream coverage, more coverage in corporate press, local press, right, becomes an avenue to get the message into prisoners because prisoners have access to more corporate news sources, et cetera, right? But and so their thought process on that is that is a politicizing tool. It's a tool to increase engagement, right? Increase participation potentially. And so that in terms of that component of it, like tactically they were successful. We were successful on that approach. Like it did get a broader reach. But I think this point that Brooke's making, right, is like, what is the costs of that broader reach? And we're not saying like, we're not the one, ultimately prisoners are the ones that have to evaluate like whether that's, the correct strategy to continue to take, right? But from our vantage point, the part of the problem was like JLS was they had a set of tactics that prisoners could engage in, right? So it was work strikes, it was boycotts, it was sit-ins, right? It was hunger strikes, right? So there were like 4 different methods that they laid out, and that never shows up in the mainstream media, right? Because that would, of course, I mean, at a certain point, I mean, the media would probably look at that of like, oh, well, we're inciting a riot or we're encouraging participation in some sort of like, so they basically can't include that, right? Whereas if it's, if it's from a channel like yours, if it's from an outlet like ours, et cetera, like we can actually talk about those things on their own terms, right? And so that's also a big, piece that is just sort of built in terms of the sort of counterinsurgent aspects of it.
Yeah, I know I was actually watching the last panel just yesterday of whatever we're calling the symposium, the conference, but I was watching that. I know part of what the discussion was about, and I'm gonna round this back to what you were just saying, Jared, but like, or both of you, but part of the discussion was, when it comes to media, some people say there's manufacturing consent argument. There's the whether it's a conspiracy, whether this is I don't know if anyone said this, but it's just kind of a colonial extension. Like Dr. Ball always talks about, like you stole everything and then you set your shit up, and this is just part of that. But how do y'all see? I guess like when you're talking about when you try to present those stories, like it always gets filtered somehow differently. Like kind of how do you see that interacting? Like what was that you think that was really driving it? Was it this kind of conspiratorial thing where they're just like, we can't speak of prisons or prisoners or inmates as these autonomous beings, or is it just like a deeper, this kind of ideological thing that's more so like a manufacturing of consent where they just control the framework, or is it both, or
I would say like Well, all these models like are all true. But they all operate simultaneously as needed. You know, one, the manufacturing consent one, that basically focuses on external kind of disciplinary facets, where basically um, outside economic or political economic like facets basically correct the media when it strays from a certain path. Stuart Hall and Policing the Crisis and more cultural studies focus basically really elucidates like the cultural self-reproduction, like how certain concepts and certain cultures basically just reproduce themselves, and this produces a certain type of news. And then the conspiracy one is basically the crudest and also the least meaningful one, but also the most common in terms of like people explaining like how these things happen, as though there's a red telephone on the desk of every editor or publisher that's hooked up to the Ministry of Truth, and you get your marching orders for the day. And like, it doesn't happen that way because that telephone lives inside their heads. You know, you like view media as a system, and view any like platform as its own like system. Systems, a mature one that's come into being, like that's stable, basically almost definitionally like reproduces itself. That's what makes up a mature system. And as such, it basically produces and vets and grooms individuals in order to perform certain roles within it. You know, and there's a weeding process. Like if you don't fit the program, you don't get hired, you don't get fired, you're not a team player. And like there's 1,000 different little ways in which you're culled, you know, and it doesn't have to be in an incredibly explicit, like out front, like correction or discipline in order to make these stories happen. Like all these people that are operating with severely truncated, ridiculous, like versions of reality, like during the 28 prison strike, all these reporters, they were just simply relaying the same ideological framework, the same worldview that like most of the country has. You know, it's just that it was put in more explicit terms due to the event between us and in front of us at that moment. You know, and they reproduced it. And like also within journalism in particular, there's this ridiculous thing called journalism school and like journalistic ethics, like in terms of self mythologization, like in terms of creation of a really kind of arcane and like really inflated view of oneself and like rules, and like so really that's the guide that like guides you, the intrepid reporter that can land and take any story and come away with the scoop, and you know, enter into any space and come away with the story. And what guides you is like truth and your ethics, like not political economy, not systems, not your place within an institutional structure, not ideology, like none of that.
So all right, I have to jump in and interrupt this nonsense because journalism schools produce some of the finest thinkers and degreed faculty on the planet. Seriously, as my man Dr. Burroughs has pointed out for years, journalism schools were funded and created by the commercial journalism community, who didn't want to have to pay to train anybody to do what they want done. They want to hire you already ideologically and practically ready to go.
Exactly.
So that's why they're there.
They outsource.
Anyway, I just had to interrupt that. Sorry. They externalized the cost of training the people who will do this.
I would love to speak for a second on that labor comment that came up in the chat too, because I think there's a really in a certain element I agree with what was said, but it was basically that. You know, there's been a kind of shift away from labor within prisoner organizing, and that's wrong or whatever, because there needs to be a focus on labor. I think there does need to be a focus on labor, but I think JLS has a great analysis of this, and it's why they broaden the tactics. And you know, the main reason is that in 2016, a lot of prisoners couldn't participate in any way at all because they didn't have jobs. By 2018, that was an even bigger issue, because by 2018, the state had already responded in certain ways to the strike in 2016 to centralize labor within their most privileged prisons, but also within their most privileged. I'm using that, you know, in scare quotes. It's like the same thing Brooke's talking about earlier about like there's like the show pony kind of prison that the media has access to with all the programs, etc. Right. So they centralized it within those security levels, but they also within each individual prison will have like one wing, right, where the prisoners perform basically all the labor for the prison, and they then get access, more privileges within the system than the other prisoners. So a huge number of prisoners within systems, like, they don't have anything that they can't really strike on a term of a work strike the way that we would think about it on the outside. And so they have to participate in some other form of resistance to that. And that was more the point in terms of both JLS's strategy, but also in terms of the broadness of their platform, right? Is that even if you increase wages for prisoners, that's only going to go to a subset of prisoners. And that's actually, that subset's going to get smaller and smaller the higher the wages are, right? So that's also, it creates its own issue.
Yeah. And there's also a very cartoonish view of like what labor is in prisons. And I'm afraid a lot of the recent advocacy and, you know, political work has kind of worsened that. Like both around the historical and kind of two-dimensional grasp of what slavery was. It was basically like making that point very publicly that this is an extension of slavery has been taken to a degree that is simplified and basically mischaracterized, like what is going on in prisons.
Yeah,
Only,
it has new Jim Crow vibes.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then like this, it does not explain like mass incarceration. You know, like when only 6% or 5% of the population inside does anything remotely like a correctional industry, whether it be for the outside or for the inside, like producing furniture or license plates or anything like that. And only like an additional 35%, 36% will have any kind of job. And usually that's low level security prison. That's the principal product of prison labor is the prison itself, is your own incarceration. It's basically to bear a cost of this massive industrial counterinsurgent trauma machine. You know, this basic community destabilization and trauma monster. Like and then the burden of that is put on you, the fucking victim, itself to maintain. And that's perverse, and that's utterly like it's like when it's I don't even want to know. People can't grasp like how that's a horror. Like you're made to participate, you know, in your own abuse and your own captivity. But that is the product of prison labor. There is no profit being made. Like it's not an industry that makes profit or creates surplus value. You know, it just isn't. But that's a popularized view, so people kind of react to that. And it's also accessible to the liberal audience. Because in a way that you are basically legible as a human being to the liberal imagination is like through a variety of roles and personas, like as the citizen, you know, as the voting citizen, as voter, as consumer, you know, as political subject, but also as worker. And the liberals' way of reconciling any of these complaints isn't to address the settler colonial brutality and the state of like domestic warfare going on within the United States and having to take a side. It's to basically increase the wages to recognize you as worker, and then shelve the whole issue. And that's their way of reconciling the contradiction. So there's a certain blockage within a lot of people's conception of the world that keeps them from recognizing anything else in those demands. You know, they can't recognize prisons as essentially a dehumanization machine, and that the trauma and the brutality, you know, is the point. That is the purpose. You know.
Yeah, and I think the comment you said there, Brooke, too, in terms of domestic warfare, I mean, that's the frame that Brooke and I more and more look at prisons through, right? Is a weapon of domestic warfare.
Look at America.
You know, yeah. But you know, racialized class domestic warfare, right? Dylan Rodriguez talks about that well, Ruthie Wilson Gilmore, right? But I think that and so then, you know, even to talk about prison slavery a bit, like if you talk to JLS about what they mean by prison slavery, right, they have a very strong articulation of it. And it is not just about wages, right? It is not just about labor. It is about a condition of confinement, captivity, dehumanization, and being in a master-slave relationship with your captors, right? And so that's really the basis, right? And that basis doesn't go away just because folks start to earn more wages, especially in captivity, because you could get more money, right? And then the prison is just going to increase the cost of phone services. They'll just increase, they'll find all types of ways, right? They have literally a captive market, right? And so, there's all sorts of ways. So we're not here to advocate against raises in wages or anything like that. But we are saying that like there's a reason why JLS had 10 demands and not one, right? And that's a component of the overall platform, but it's not the whole thing.
I just want to make sure, because I don't know if you've said it. You're talking about Jailhouse Lawyers Speaks, the organization of imprisoned activists that you work with and support. I just want to make sure that that's said. I want to ask you to come back, say a little bit more about this point, Brooke, Jared, about our misunderstanding of what slavery was and how it's misunderstood now. In other words, if are you saying that the problem is that people are taking forward this idea that at least part of the process of enslavement was to produce materials and wealth for someone, and then the process of the prison has nothing to do with that, and that's the connection you're looking to distort, to destroy? What?
Yeah, I'll start, and I know Brooke has thoughts on it as well. But so it's a focus on the notion that prison labor is designed to produce profit, right? So like we're not saying obviously slavery was, right? Slavery was a profit making, monster, right? But it was a lot more than that too, right? Like we could get into social reproduction theory. We could get into discussions about, all the domestic labor aspects of slavery, right? We could get into, discussions of what the conditions of slavery actually were, and the conditions of captivity and brutality, right? So we're saying that overall condition. So we're not disagreeing with the slavery frame. We're saying that the way that slavery gets read within the media, and particularly within the representations that come through in it, is as because prisoners don't make a wage, right? That this is why it's slavery. We're saying more broadly that no, it is slavery, right? But it is slavery mainly because they're captives, right? Because slavery was a system of captivity. And we're saying that the profit element of it gets focused on too much, because the profit comes through in things like private prisons, which are a very small percentage of prisons overall, or it comes through in things like food services and the phone services, etc. And those are profiteers, right? No denying that. We're not saying that they're good, but you have profiteers in every industry, right? You have profiteers in schools, you have profiteers, in all kinds of public services. There are groups like Aramark, right, that will come in and say, hey, we'll serve food to all of your students and we'll make 15 cents off of each meal. And because we're doing it over this kind of scale, we'll make money off of it, right? And so the profiteers obviously are another level of, it's just disgusting, right? But it's not, but that's not the reason for the system. We're saying the reason for the system is that it is a form of domestic warfare.
Brooke, did you want to add any to that?
I pretty much encapsulated it. I mean,
okay.
Except that you in your conversations with Wilderson, you very much lay out all the different conditions of social death and anti-blackness in the Western world, well, in the global context. And we've been sending Wilderson in, and people have been reading Wilderson inside. And they see themselves exactly like there's no great amongst the politicizing folks inside. Basically, reading Wilderson, like if the folks are capable of reading his prose, is pretty dense, like stuff. Like, but his definitions of slavery are just like they see themselves immediately in it, in how, in what's being denied them in terms of their state, and that The instrumentality of prisons, it's structurally necessary. I think people resort to certain explanations of the prison system that are like within arm's reach, because once you begin to examine it in any real way, it doesn't make any sense in terms of the mythology and the reasoning that's offered for them. It's obviously all bullshit, you know. And so, like, but you reach for explanations that are accessible to you. It's like there's the institutions or agencies like run amok, that are just like without oversight explanation with the liberal one. That it's an aberration, that it needs to be reined in with like due process and like reform. There's the explanation like, no, it's a conspiracy. Like they're locking us up to grab our labor, to make money off of us. Like it's a short term. It's a short con. It's a hustle, because that's immediately understandable. It's an explanation, but these explanations aren't analyses, and they don't hold up under any numerical or any real argument at all. Like if you actually start to know the history and examine the bottom line, prisons are immensely expensive. Immensely expensive. There's no profit being made by them, but they are essential to capitalism. But for various reasons, as a form of destabilization and as a form of population control, and a form of maintaining stability, like within the settler colonial state.
Yeah, I just want to say quickly, like there is a profit motive, right? And there is a surplus value motive, but that comes from corporate America. It comes from business, and not the business of extracting profit from prisoners, but actually the business of extracting profit from everybody on the outside, right? And so that is, in order to understand this, like you really have to even go back to like the early 70s, right? And look at even what the ruling class is saying in this period about their basically one pushing back against universal employment, pushing back against high unemployment rates, right? And pushing back against what they deemed as like the unruly worker in this period, the worker who would just go to a job for a day and then leave and say, fuck this, I'm going to go on unemployment, or I'm going to go work somewhere else, or I don't care, right? I'm not going to put in 40 years like my father in these terrible conditions, right? And so in that same time frame, right, at the height of, Black Panthers, Black Liberation Army, Young Lords, like the New Left, etc., right? League of Revolutionary Black Workers, which two Black, their media work in the course, right? So there's a lot of revolutionary activity happening at the same time, and so really, like in my analysis of the prison system, right, the humongous outgrowth of that you see in it from 1970 on is just trying to combat all of that, right? And so one of the ways that you bring people to the market being willing to accept worse conditions and lower wages and all of that, right, is you break up their families, right? You say, okay, like, you have to work and take care of your kids, right? Because one of your family members is going to be locked up, right? And so that happens obviously most targeted to the Black community, to Latino communities, to Native American communities, right? It also happens to large groups of poor whites, right, that often don't fit into our analysis if we're just looking at it strictly on racialized terms. But it's also, I mean, there's just a lack of solidarity among white people to like poor white folks or drug users or any of these other things, and that also is also a part of what media tells us, right? Is like just don't think about these people as like real human beings,
Well, Will Smith's pending and forthcoming incarceration may bring some new light to all of this. But speaking of bringing new light, I do want to bring up someone who is joining us and well known to these streets as well, Erica Caines, aka Ricky Ryan, aka Black Alliance for Peace, and probably every other formation that is radically doing work, and was also a participant in this great seminar. So thank you, Erica, for joining us. And let me just invite you to respond to anything you've heard so far this morning, or to talk a little bit about the panel you were on, the session 4 covering social movements and repression within various media contexts.
Yeah. Peace, everyone. Thank you for inviting me on. Yeah, so I don't think I mentioned it, but a lot of me meeting Jared was Jared Ware, of course, is through the 2018 prison strike. We actually started working maybe that February because something happened in South Carolina. There was like an initial strike that happened. That was like, I guess, a tester. And then he wrote me right on in. So I always attribute that 2018 strike to a lot of my development and organizing, because I got introduced to a lot of organizers through that network. But then that's how my book club started, because the first book we read was Angela Davis, Our Prisons Obsolete. Because at the time, I didn't really know much about prison abolition. Mariam Kaba was one of the first people that I really knew of that was speaking about prison abolition in the sense where, prisons shouldn't exist, right? And I was one of those people like, okay, yeah, but then what do we do with the people who do harm? Like, so what do we do with the rapists? So what do we do, So I would always ask those circular questions. And when I got involved in the prison strike, I was getting asked those questions. And I didn't really have any answers for them. So I invited folks to read Angela Davis, Our Prisons Obsolete with me. We did phone zap networks, Devin Springer, myself, Belfina Yuan, Nana Amuchi. We hosted teach-ins here in Baltimore. So we did a lot of activity around that prison strike. And then 2 months later, I was booted off of Twitter permanently. So, yeah. So, and following that prison strike, because I met so many people, that's how I got involved in Black Alliance for Peace. I started that October. So a lot of my organizing is directly attributed to that prison strike and meeting Jared and being introduced to a plethora of people who were doing all kinds of things.
Right on. Was somebody trying to jump in? My fault. No.
I was going to respond to the
go ahead.
on the labor point, and then we can round back or move forward. I think Ruth Wilson Gilmore talks about it, and again, I don't disagree with what anybody said. I'm just adding to it, but you had surplus populations. So we're talking about surplus value, but you have surplus populations, as to say that, with deindustrialization, with so-called integration, you just didn't have enough jobs, honestly, for people to work anyway. So prisons become an option as a way to, as y'all already talked about, as a way to control those populations. So you see this big outgrowth of prisons, in the late 70s into the 80s, and she talks about this in Golden Gulag, like particularly in California, you see this big burst in prisons because we don't have anything else to do with them, and this isn't in any benevolent way. It's like y'all talked about, it's a form of social control. So it's not just, so when people say slavery, or in a very like narrow sense of just profit, it assumes that prisons were built specifically with the logic of we are trying to make money off of this population. And is actually in many ways the opposite. There's nothing to be made off of these people anymore. There's nothing left to do with them, but we can't have them running around starting revolution or, disturbing our commerce. So we need to put them away somewhere, right? Like that's the logic. So of course there's like profiteering, like y'all talked about within that metric. But like public schools have the same. We talked about this I think in my session, like public schools, specifically public schools, I'm not talking about other things, have, profit making. Like, there's always going to be some kind of private relationship with outsiders. There's vending machines in schools, but nobody would say that schools are made so people can make money off vending machines. You know what I'm saying? Like that's just a part of it, but that's not the driving logic of the thing. So that's
schools were the design, the 4D chess outcome of Frito-Lay's.
Right. and munchies or what, you know what I'm saying? Like that's not the driving logic. That's a part of it. So we can talk about it because that's something to criticize, like how there's like way of privatizing and profiteering off of literal children in this case, but that's not the driving kind of like logic as to why these things are built. So that's all I wanted to add. As far as like we think of prisons as far as the slavery thing, I think 13th has been detrimental in some ways and helping create a misunderstanding of it. And And they try to draw this through line of history where it's just this extension of slavery in this kind of narrow sense to just racialize and oppress people. But they never quite, that logic never quite explains, like, why are we doing this? And I would even say, I was talking to someone about this yesterday, even this narrative of like neoliberalism, I don't know if it always holds up. And I know I'm in a minority in this position, but I think neocolonialism is a more effective way of understanding it. Neoliberalism assumes in the 70s that basically they start privatizing all these commons and, you know, started like this austerity and cutting social programs. But when you think about this in a racial component, like we're talking about with Black folks, like we weren't involved in most of these programs. So at the very moment that it was time to bring us into it, then neoliberalism starts. But I would just say that's the extension of neocolonialism, because there's just not enough capital to integrate everyone into it. So the moment that there's even a little bit of independence, whether that's here or globally speaking, to integrate colonized people into it, you cannot bring all of them in. So you got to start cutting social services. You got to start putting them in prisons because you don't have enough capital to support and still make profit. I don't think that's neoliberalism. I just think that's neocolonialism.
Can I ask?
I agree. Please.
To the point about slavery, and then it's not necessarily, prisons are not necessarily a unit for profit. I'm thinking of like Eric Williams. I'm thinking of Du Bois, who wrote about like the towards the end of slavery, it wasn't profitable either, but they still were like determined to keep it. Is that something that would be applicable in this sense? Like, it's not driven for the purpose of profit, but they still are maintaining it for that sense of social control.
Anybody?
Brooke, go ahead.
I think that's an interesting point. But that there's a certain point where a certain social regime like depends upon these institutions, and like part of the Civil War was, well, one, beyond being a massive general strike of the enslaved population, let's put that like right up front, like Lincoln didn't save anybody. Like, then this was a massive economic shift to get these kind of provincial, like, basically the Southern oligarchy could not evolve to the new phase of capitalism. Like, and they were holding on to an unprofitable form. I think the prison system is going to be very, I don't know. I kind of want to think about this more, but the commitment to the prisons and its reliance upon it to basically like destabilize communities in its form of social control has its own inertia. You know, I don't think it's going to shift easily. Basically, I don't think it's going to shift at all, considering like how much it's relied upon, and it's essentially it's an expression of the antagonism, you know, between the ownership class and everybody else, between, you know, white capital and everybody else. And unless you overthrow that, like, I don't see prisons going away ever. You know, so like this whole dismantling the prison system, I'm not one of those kind of abolitionists. I frankly recognize abolition as basically a synonym for revolution. You know, but in terms of like institutional, like inertia and inability, like, yeah, people will hang on to that shit even if it's killing them. Like, and that goes even for guards. Like, guards kill themselves and basically overdose at like incredible rates, except their whole identity is being a correctional guard, like, you know, and they will pursue that, and they're a true believer to the end. They're hanging on to that thing, you know, for the life of them. So I think that's also like a parable, or like, you know, a metaphor for the system itself. Like, it's death roll. It's just hanging on to its like stability, like, even though it's spiraling towards just a complete implosion and suicide.
Yeah,
I'm not surprised at that. My bad. Just going into for visits or to teach a class is fucking traumatic.
Yeah,
I would be traumatized just like preparing myself for that, and then sitting there, you know, where they, you know, where I felt like they were sometimes intentionally trying to mess with me as a representative of something they didn't want to have happen there, by slowing down the you sit around, you hear the guards talking to each other, greeting each other, coming in and off shift and all this stuff. They seem miserable. They're like, of course they're not, they can't be, to what you're saying, Brooke, has to be right. Like, so even if you're not incarcerated, even if you're not existing at that level of trauma, just the experience of the space has to be negative, even if we don't feel necessarily inclined to care so much about the guards. I mean, it can't be a good experience for them. Seriously, like I'd be all hot and sweaty, and my chest would be, my heartbeat pouncing, like just going through the process, just getting ready to go into the building. I mean, it's just horrible. So anyway, my bad, man. It can't be good for anybody. Too black. Sorry, go ahead. Or yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I feel you. I've had to do that too, and it's like, but and side note, as far as those prisons, a lot of times they're built in these, really underdeveloped rural areas, and they give people jobs. So, like any job you endure, because that's all people have. This is not a defense of prison guards in any means. I'm just saying that's just how it tends to play out. I think as far as like the whole slavery thing again, like, I mean, I think sometimes people talk about capitalism, they tend to, this in general, not just with prisons, but in general, people tend to just focus on profit as like the only kind of way of understanding capitalism, or just direct profit as in, I buy low, sell high kind of logic. But social control is imperative to capitalism. And if we understand this again as an extension of colonialism, not just capitalism separate of that, then we understand that there's profit in social control essentially, but it's just not a direct profit. So a lot of times, especially once we get to the level of monopoly capitalism, there's not much more profit to be made. So now you're just buying up all your competitors. Now you're just trying to keep people out of the market so you can keep making money yourself, so you don't want anybody else to come in. So prisons also serve that function of, you just have a population you can just lock out of the market that doesn't threaten anything you're doing, and you can have control over that. Even if it's expensive, it's less expensive than to reacclimate these people into society, to give them, fair wages, even under the system of capitalism. That's way more expensive. Like, I mean, we talk about all the time, Black Awakening in Capitalist America, and there's a part in that book where Robert Allen talks about how they try to read like these program where corporations paid for some of like the so-called lump-ins to get back into the job industry, and it required so much training that he was like, it's completely unsustainable. They're not going to do it, right? So it's better to just, all right, fund prisons. Now there is this friction now with some parts of white capital that think it's time to at least reduce that population, because it is putting some strain on whatever other things they want to do. And now they want to open it up where you can be in prison in your home, and you can be an at-home prisoner. You know what I'm saying? So you could, just like workers or whatever, like now you have those frictions. And I don't think it's a one-to-one, but when we're talking about with slavery, there were similar frictions with capital as far as like how we want to expand westward. Wages might be more stable. It might be less costly than just, paying for slaves who we have to house and feed and all of that. So there's debates within capital, but again, I think to think of it solely as just this kind of like profit, this narrow profit narrative where it's just like, okay, we want to take this and make more money off of that. It's like, no, ultimately, like the point is to control this shit. It's not just about the making money. It's about making sure that these markets stay, under our boot, right? And that's where prisons are very essential to helping do that.
Yeah, and like 2 points to add to that. I appreciate all that, like you just laid out really well. But like the first point, like the Koch brothers are supporters of decarceration. Mm-hmm. And like, well, I guess there's just one of them left, so
and I'm sorry, Brooke, to interrupt you again, but I'm so angry and petty and immature that I have to say that the Real News Network took down all my shit. And one of the great interviews I had up there was about that very issue with Brett Grody from the Abolitionist Law Center, talking about at the time when this was coming out, and Jay-Z and everybody was out there talking about, we got to become decarceral, and they're running around with Weinstein and doing all that other bullshit. I did this interview with Brett where he broke it down and said the Koch brothers are trying to lead the way to get everybody locked up in their homes and make more money with more people being incarcerated, cheaper costs because you don't even have to pay guards and shit like that. You don't have to worry about all that. And anyway, so excuse me again because that interview is now gone. But
I went looking for it.
Go ahead.
I saw that when it came out because I've been listening to I Mix What I Like for like a decade, and I went back and like looked for that. It was gone, and it's like what the. Like, yeah, a bunch of punks. But
so keep hating on that. Anyway, sorry about that. To drag you all into my pettiness. But sorry, please go ahead. Yeah,
because like big capital, like they're far seeking. Like they actually pay a whole phalanx of like theorists and economists basically to look 5, 10, 20 years down the road. Like that's a level of social planning at this billionaire level. Like, and like they like not only like two things were happening, like the level of control and surveillance, like at large, had increased due to like the digital technology and bracelets and cameras. So basically, they wanted to invert the prison, like flip it inside out, and let the city be a prison itself. You know, and two, like they wanted to actually discipline the labor force. They wanted more competition to drive wages down. You know, but like the second point, I just kind of wanted to slip in here, and you mentioned how traumatic it is just to walk in a prison. Like hell yeah, it is. We do jail support outside of prison all the time, just unconditional material support for releasees, and just being there, like, you know, raises my heart rate and everybody else's who's been locked up. Some people can't do it. Like they just do not even want to see the physical place, you know, because it all comes flooding back. And for anybody that's had people locked up or been locked up, you know, I mean, half the country doesn't know this because they're not the populations that get policed and locked up. You know, predominantly like middle class and white people. They do not know like any of this stuff. So like half my media work is explaining what one half of the country knows to the other half of the country that's just a bunch of clueless, privileged people. But like communities and families do a kind of time with you. You do it with you. They don't know how destabilizing it is. Like when you got a loved one lock up, like that brother, that father, that sister, that neighbor is gone. Not only just their earning power, their presence in your life, and like your life shifts to now doing double duty, putting money on their books, and the worry, the utter powerlessness of it. If your like family needs psych meds, like you're constantly worried about, are they getting it or not? Like there's a level of stress and like destabilization that goes on the outside. People do not get how destabilized, like, and it's also an object lesson. Like anybody from amongst you can just be swept down on and just taken away, just disappeared and kidnapped. What does that do to a community? Like some of us know, and now I definitely know now that I got fam inside, So it's not just social control of the prisoner, but of the whole community that they come from. A piece of that community has been taken, and it's basically an object lesson to everybody else from that community. Like this could be you too. So like keep it in check and keep it in line and keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's why I mentioned social reproduction theory earlier. And I know that's like a jargonistic thing to say, right? But just to make it like real for people, right? Your community, your family, like these are the units, right? That like, that's how you organize your own like social structure, right? It's how you move through, and pulling people out of that, right? Obviously that reduces wages and capital for families, right? Like it reduces your ability to earn. It takes earners out of your community, but it also takes all these other things out of your community, right? It takes parents out of the community. It takes siblings out of the community. It takes folks who cook meals, who take kids to school, who, and so like that is social reproduction, right? When we talk about it, it's like all of that is necessary, in order for folks to, even in a capitalist sense, to come into the market, to go to your job on equal terms, right? And so if you target certain communities through policing and imprisonment that way, then you don't need racism in the sense of, and I know it still exists in all of these senses, but you don't need it as much in terms of like job discrimination or something like that, right? Because it's like, it's harder to go to college if you're the one person who's taking care of 3 kids, or like all of these things. It just adds up. So that is what I say when I say domestic warfare. Like, that's literally what I mean, right? Is like targeting as population through this mechanism.
I know
Black,
people
I was sorry. Go ahead, bro.
Well, I know people with cell phones that are like in California. It's not like Louisiana or the Deep South where you can get a cell phone for like $300. Here it's like $3,000, and like you risk going to the shoe or going to AdSeg like indefinitely, or even increased time. You lose contact visits. You can't get a family visit for like 5 years if you get caught with a cell phone. I know people taking that risk just so that they can help their daughter with homework every night. I know a dude. He basically uses Google Street View to cruise his old neighborhood just to see people that he knows, or see how the neighborhood's changed. And like that's the level of shit going on.
To Black, in your Hood Communist piece, I did want to ask you. I thought it was interesting how your interview starts. The beginning of the interview starts with the brother asking you if you have any experience being locked up, which I thought was, and you shared a little bit. I'm wondering if you would talk a little bit about any of that here, real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I've never been locked up, but like as I told him, my brother was incarcerated. So sometimes, this is any journalism, when not just when you're talking to people in prison. Like, sometimes those things help identify a certain familiarity or an understanding or even an empathy. But yeah, I mean, I think I talked about it a little bit more, and some of it we had to cut out in the Black Mispod, but all of us had family that's been incarcerated, and some of us had like Cam, my co-host, her father has been involved in prison riots, still has brain aneurysms because he got beat up by a guard, like had a seizure just a month ago because of that, because that's still something he has to live with. So yeah, I mean, for me, for really all of us on the show, and I'm sure everybody on this panel too, like, this isn't a theoretical question, or some kind of just whatever in the abstract. Like, this is a real thing, and I've seen it up close, where it just not by simply not being able to afford a lawyer, you are pretty much sentenced just off of that. Like, you can't afford a lawyer. It doesn't really matter what they charge you with. Nobody's going to be able to investigate it. So you got to plead out, or then the DA will hit you with or the prosecutor's office will hit you with like 20 years for something petty. So you'll plead out to like 5 years, and then you end up with a felony. And then this just keeps going. So like Jared was saying, like, this becomes this perpetual cycle that people have to always constantly deal with and interact with. And it stifles any, your ability to quote unquote succeed in society. I mean, all of that's bullshit anyway, but I'm just saying, like, all of that stands in your way. And then you're working backwards, right? You're already working backwards anyway, even if you're not in prison, but you're just working backwards even further. And then and as I think Trotter says in one of our, because I talked to him the most, but he talks about how these things just become another rationalization to further criminalize you. So you do something and then you just use it to lock them up even further.
I have a family member who's been a part of that since they were in first grade. So when y'all were talking about social control and social conditioning, I've been thinking about all the times that he was arrested on the school campus. This is in the Bronx. The building where my aunt lived is right across the street from the school. They instead decided to call the precinct on a 6-year-old. And then from then, it's been a continuous thing to where he is now 23 and still in jail. So it's always been a consistent thing. And I think, like, earlier in me understanding or trying to understand abolition and prisons, because when this was all starting for him, I was still in high school. I didn't really have any concrete answers for them. But in trying to learn all these things, and then the discussion about the school to prison pipeline still seemed to fall short around what was happening to not just him, but all of his friends, like that entire community. Like, South Bronx already has that, it's already an issue in that area as far as policing and incarceration. But just in the last 5 years, the uptick of youth in Castle Hill, Monroe, Soundview, Stevenson, like that, just that general area of all those projects. The youth is pretty much all in Rikers or all in, across the state. So when y'all are talking about social control and jobs, I'm thinking about how many Black males have been snatched before they could even begin to process a life or process, wanting to do something or getting a job, right? Because again, I said my nephew's been assaulted with this since elementary school. So those are things I'm thinking about, because I know we're not the only family. Going to those court dates, I know we're not the only family, but it's still something that's reoccurring. It's still something that, we're trying to manage. But I don't think that school to prison I don't think that's applicable in this situation. Still, even though it is a trajectory they're doing, I still don't think that it answers what's happening to these students or these Black youth, because it's also happening to there's a major uptick in Black girls, and Black girls, especially in New York, are getting kingpin charges. Like, it's out of control. But it's an uptick that we're seeing. And I don't think that school to prison, I think it's a good entry point, but I don't really think that it explains the phenomenon that we're seeing.
Yeah, if I could just respond to that quickly.
Sure.
I mean, you're absolutely right, Erica. And I think it's, the problem with a lot of these, these terms or these phrases become overly academic sometimes, and they also become, it's kind of like folks want to water it down to a meme or a slogan,
a nonprofit funding line.
Right, exactly.
Whether
right,
you learn
exactly.
how to read,
yeah,
in third grade, which is anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, and again, like, this is keep going back to it, but this is why we look at something like domestic warfare, right, as a frame, right? Because, when you're talking about children with like cops in the school and getting charges and things like that, right? Like, that's the school as prison, right? That's not school like to prison, because school to prison is, in the way that it gets framed out, is often like, oh, well, if you're not reading at this grade level, right, then you're not going to be able to get to this, to that. Like, no, like, this is already a carceral space, right? You're entering into a compound with police, with metal detectors, and you are policed in this space, right? Which should be, your liberal, safe space, learning space, etc. Right? It's not that for a lot of folks, and I think that's really important to name.
That's it. Well, listen, folks, I really appreciate you all coming through this morning. I appreciate all the work you're all collectively doing. And obviously, we're here to support that and look forward to more. If there's any parting comments or thoughts real quick that any of you want to make, please do. Otherwise, we've got everything, I think, linked in the show notes. I've added a couple more even as we were talking. But I really appreciate that you, Brooke and Jared, put this symposium together. And it's always good to hear from and see Erica and Two Black doing their thing as well. So, but anybody got anything before that I missed or that they wanted to get a chance to say?
I just wanted to thank Jared and Brooke. I was only on the last session, but I did watch everyone's, and it was so good. Yours and Two Black. So I do appreciate being invited to participate in that. So I want to thank you both again.
Yeah, right on.
Thanks to everybody here that also participated. It means a lot, and also means a lot. This is just, again, totally petty, but I've been listening to I Mix What I Like for like a decade, and it was like a form of stability in my life, even when I had none. And so in terms of like media being that kind of political home, like you were part of that, Jared. And beyond this is a trip.
I appreciate it. Well, we have to do more. I look forward to it. So thank you very much for the kind words. Everybody coming through, everybody in the chat, thank you very much. I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm going to do, I got a little more time. We got to have some fun with this Black News channel and Roland Martin.
I just want to say, want to say thank you to you, Jared, and thank you to Black and Erica and Brooke, and for the whole series. For this is a great conversation. But the whole series, you know, it's long. Like, I just want people to know you're getting into like 11 hours of stuff. So I appreciate you, Jared, for hosting that all here on Black Power Media. But there's a lot of great conversations there. Other folks that are a part of it, Brian Sonnenstein, Brandon Soderberg, am I missing? Kelly Hayes was a part of it too. And so there's a lot of great journalists, and you know, you all had a lot of a great part in it as well. So I encourage people to check it out. I also just plug, there's a syllabus that goes with it, which has a lot of great reading and videos and audio and stuff like that. So it's really supposed to be a tool for folks to use to figure out what they can get out of it, and hopefully it generates you know, some positive things that will come from that.
Right on. The show notes here already have a link to the full playlist, and each video has a link to your site with the syllabus and all the other notes as well. So we do, and it is a lot, but it's worth it, and it's there for you to come back to at your convenience. So again, thanks to you all for doing that and for coming through this morning. I appreciate you. Yeah, please go ahead.
I was just saying the piece, the second interview or excerpt of it will drop on in Hill Communist this week, and then we're playing the extension of all of the conversation I had and that we had is on Black myths from the part 1 of last week. The myth was violence is never the answer, and then part 2 drops this week, so you'll get more. And we're also talking to Shaka Shakur, who was a political prisoner in Indiana who got shipped out to Virginia because he was such a problem to the Department of Corrections. So we're talking to him this week too. So I just want everybody to peep out for that. Keep pay attention for that, and then there'll be more updates because this is an ongoing struggle. Because our goal ultimately is, you know, is to free them all, as we say. So there'll be more updates, and I'll probably come on here at some other point to talk more about it. So
absolutely, and he didn't mention it, but Too Black is forgetting that part 3 of the Is Violence Necessary featuring Will Smith will be coming out in a couple weeks as well. So stay tuned to Black Myths for those updates as well. And shout out to all of you. Thank you very much. Peace, because we know you're willing to fight for it. And we're going to take a quick break and come right back here. I mix what I like. Thanks, everybody.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
All right, good people. Welcome back to I Mix What I Like. That was very dope. I really appreciate all of them. And I hope you all, if you haven't already, check out all that was referenced in that discussion and enjoy. So as I said, just because of again, I keep thinking I'll save these for a Not By Myself. So we'll just have to call this a Not By Myself segment. Because the scheduling makes it good to happen now. So I appreciate all of you who are sticking around live, and those of course who will see this later. Please, well, first of all, thank you, and please do like, share, subscribe, click the join, membership, all that kind of good stuff as well. Definitely go to blackpowermedia.org and get your new merch, get your t-shirts and your mugs, and support the channel that way as well. So we've discussed the Black News channel here before, and in the context of talking about why we think, or I think that Black Power Media is so important, and what sets us apart. And of course, it was announced over the last couple of days, over the weekend, that the billionaire funder is no longer interested in supporting the Black News channel, and they are closing their doors. So Roland Martin offered up his assessment of the situation, and or as he describes it, an autopsy. And I thought it would be of great value to check it out, at least some of it. His conversation is a little longer than we'll have this morning, but I think it at least opens the door for us to not just have a little bit of petty fun, which I admit I'm guilty of that, but to get into some sort of actual, I think, substantive analysis of the situation. So let me pull this up here, and we will get started.
What's going on? What's the whole deal here? The reality is this here. It was the absolute worst time to launch a cable network. Why? Because the world had been changing. The cord cutting came in. People began to get rid of cable. Then they began to go towards online. I told J.C. Watts directly, don't launch a linear network. Launch it as a digital network. I said, why? More cost effective. You can grow it faster and larger, and you're not going to be able to spend as much money. Now, why does that matter? A lot of people out there are saying, this ain't right. Man, this man is a billionaire. He got the money. Y'all, folk who are billionaires ain't in the business of losing money. That ain't what they do. They see what's going on. If you don't see the profit potential, I'm cutting ties. My understanding, for the last 3 months, he's been struggling and not wanting to fund what's been going on. You read the letter where they had the layoffs in December. Those were not enough layoffs. They were burning too much cash. So the first mistake they made was launching a linear network. Now, I need you to understand the cable business. You know the cable business, how it has always worked. You get paid for subscribers. So if you're in 51 million homes, you negotiate the deal where you get 2 cents, 3 cents, 5 cents, a dime, a quarter.
All right. So first of all, I got to stop it already. First of all, a couple things real quick that I think are important here. J.C. Watts, for people of certain age and generation, will remember that he was the very conservative Black Republican congressman for a whole bunch of years. In fact, let me just let's see. JC in America was the Republican Party. How long did he serve exactly here? 1994, elected, I think, for the first time, coming out of Oklahoma. Electoral history. Yeah, 1994. Then he won again in 96, 98, and 2000, I think, is when he wrapped up or started his final. Anyway, but the point I'm getting at is that J.C. Watts, what Martin I don't think mentions here is that J.C. Watts initially announced the Black News Channel as intending to have a conservative political approach. So I think even before the issue that Roland Martin starts with of the Black News Channel setting its up to fail because it didn't understand the shifting landscape and going into the linear cable model, which I think is a legit criticism, since most of them are trying to move, even the elite ones are trying to move into the digital space. But even before that, I think is the issue that is missed here. Yes, there are conservative strands that run through the Black community, socially in particular, but politically not the case at all. So the idea that you're going to put together a Black news channel that's supposed to attract a large Black audience, which would be seen then as something marketable to a billionaire funder, and advertising ad buyers, that is flawed from the beginning. You're not going to have a big audience. There is not going to be a large or a sizable Black audience to watch conservative Black targeting news. And of course, there's not going to be a large white audience, conservative or otherwise, to watch conservative. So that was the first thing that I think Roland either didn't know or chose not to emphasize or is missing, that I think is the key component, and why I think that Black Power Media actually is more in line with what either Roland Martin or the Black News Channel were trying to do as it relates to where Black people actually are politically, and of course where we think Black people should be headed politically. So in other words, if anything, I would argue that both J.C. Watts and Roland Martin do themselves a disservice by trying to be more middle of the road. Now, Roland, of course, would probably disagree that he's got a sizable audience. He seems to know what he's doing with his commercial media arrangement. He's getting his Verizon and Toyota money and all this other stuff, and has more views on his videos than we do at this point, et cetera, and so forth. But I think that has more to do with promotion than actual content. And were his audience and the broader and more of a Black audience if they were made more known of what was happening here and in other spaces that we work with and are in allegiance with, I think, anyway, but in many cases, I actually think that the funding is there to keep people like Roland Martin prominent as a mitigating factor against an increasing Black radicalism. The other component to that I think Roland Martin misses in this is that, and I'll come to this in a few minutes and show a little bit of what he's talking about and some data behind it. But yes, the elite cable channel media make money and work for a profit, but I don't actually think that is the intended goal. And there are billionaires like Rupert Murdoch who buy major media outlets like the New York Post and the Wall Street Journal and operate them at a loss financially, but because they want to have the political influence in the conversation. So I haven't looked at it, but I will show you the numbers for Fox, MSNBC, and CNN. I didn't look long enough or carefully enough to find some others. Like, for instance, I would guess that something like Bloomberg, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong here, but my initial thought would be that Bloomberg News Channel operates at a loss because Bloomberg wants to have a foothold in the international discussion of economic and business news, and to influence it. I know that is the case with the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post for Rupert Murdoch. But my point is that media are not here for the commercial press and commercial media in general. Pop culture is not produced for a profit. It's not, the initial purpose is not financial. It is political, managing public opinion and behavior. So anyway, so I think he just missed that one part. But anyway, let me just continue here.
The most expensive folks in terms of on cable networks have long been ESPN, Fox News, because the amount of money they get per cable subscriber. So if you have cable television right now, when you look at your bill, you look at how much money in your bill, a significant portion, the largest portion of your bill right now is going to Fox News and ESPN. That's why people start cutting cable. They said cable bills got too high, spending $100, $150, $200 for cable. They said that's enough. The problem for Black News Channel, they were not getting subscription fees. So they were a 100% ad-supported cable network. Well, folks, that subscription fee is a revenue line. That means that you're airing on the network hoping folks are watching. You need to have high numbers so you can actually get advertising. When you don't have high numbers in cable, you get what is called bottom of the barrel advertising, which is direct marketing. What's direct marketing? That's when you're sitting, seeing those commercials with a 1-800 number attached to it, and it's Joe Namath doing some kind of insurance pitch, or Jimmy J.J. Walker. That's direct marketing, folks. Those are the commercials that you're seeing. Those commercials, you get money, it's low amount of money. So those were the majority of the advertisers that were.
So again, I get it. Roland Martin has to be aware of these details and the importance of how to get the top tier ad revenue. But this is something, again, that I've been pointing out and others have been pointing out in different ways for a number of years. It is a major problem with the commercial press that is targeting Black audiences, whether it's Black owned like Roland Martin or anything else like BNC was. To target larger ad revenue, it stands to reason you have to appeal to their interests politically and to reach a broader audience, which is often unconsciously or not recognized to be an audience that can't be dragged, again, left of the Democratic Party, invited to consider many of the isms that we talk about here, national, social, communal, Pan-African, anti-colonial, anti-imperial, and all those other isms that we engage here. You can't do that, even if, when laid out, as is I think most often the case, more people are interested in those ideas, which is, you know, even in the broader society in the United States, why so much of that mainstream commercial press is designed specifically to make sure that the will of a majority of the people for things like universal health care, improved labor conditions, etc., an absence of war, all of these things that an overwhelming majority of the population want are not to be served and not to have their interests encouraged. So of course he's going to say that, and that is Roland Martin is going to in his own work attempt to attract the Verizons and the so on and so forth, which is why we end up getting, I think, some of the content we get. And before I come back to that, I just want to show some of what some of the context that I think that Martin is in one way or another dealing with here. Since 2008, 26% drop in newsroom employment just across the board. So just over years, you could just see this graph that's just going down and down and down. So just overall, the employment. So when Roland Martin is talking about the amount of people that BNC hired and who he hires and how he pays them, and he actually goes into a whole bunch of this in his what he calls an autopsy of BNC. Roland Martin, I don't think he appropriately mentions this context that. And this is actually something that I initially was learning from 20 some odd years ago from Glenn Ford, that the first thing you do in a commercial journalism or media outlet is you get rid of the investigative reporters, which is why, as Glenn was talking about 20 years ago, there's no Black investigative journalism being funded anywhere anymore, including on Black radio, where you would have been more likely to find it historically. And then just in general, one of the reasons why even at the university level, where I've seen it myself in my own career, the struggle between professional journalists who lose their jobs in the commercial media environment because of what I'm showing you here, who end up taking, in some cases, very high paying jobs in universities to teach in journalism schools that are there to take money from the journalism community to have people trained to work in a journalism industry that is itself dying, and they're taking jobs that are formerly held by academicians who you would think might have some value at a university, but in terms of the journalism school university relationship, that's not always the case. So it becomes this. So what ends up happening is we see it happening now. Professional journalists without academic background, or some with academic background, who are only in the academic setting, not because they want to teach, but because that's the only place they can find employment, to teach students to go into a field that doesn't even exist anymore, or to go into a field that is the faculty no longer can teach and train people for, because they lost their job, and the job they lost doesn't exist. So what I was curious about, and I think we raised this when we talked about BNC before, is why would anybody invest in developing a Black targeted news operation, a commercial based Black operation targeting news operation, if the goal is to make money? It's not a money-making venture, and as Pew is showing you here, even in the white, well-funded commercial world, there is not a lot of room for paid journalism. So, similarly, I closed the wrong one. Similarly, yep, I closed the wrong one, so I have to come back. Let me, my bad. And now we got to move it ahead a little bit. Okay. So let me just show you this one here. The other one that I wanted to show is also from Pew. I think this is Pew also. Yeah, Pew Research Center is, and this is something Roland Martin's about to get into a little bit, the profits of Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC. So you can see they are steadily rising. And in 2020, Fox News is said to have profited almost $1.8 billion. CNN, 700 million. MSNBC, 500 million, 75 or just under 600 million in profit. And I'll come back to that in a second. I did just want to show you that. I'm gonna come back here to Roland Martin, and then I'll come back to my point about those profits in a second that I think he misses in his, again, autopsy of the situation.
The best ever numbers. And so, well, guess what? It got cut. Now, you're watching and you might be saying, wait a minute, this guy, Shahid Khan, he put in $50 million. My goodness, how in the world is it they somehow could not solve this thing and figure it out? Let me unpack that as well, folks. I need y'all to understand the economics. There's a whole bunch of people been tweeting me all day. I don't understand why this couldn't work. I don't know, why couldn't some Black celebrities get together and buy it? Why couldn't Byron Allen buy it? Y'all, if a billionaire Shahid Khan cut ties, why in the hell would Byron Allen or somebody else do it? Now, I was told that Byron Allen did offer $30 million to buy the network. Khan did not accept that. He wanted $100 million. Why? He'd already put in $50 million. But even at $30 million really didn't make any sense, because Byron could simply take that money and put 10 or 15 million in his Griot channel and the Griot website, build up their news side, and you don't have to assume all the debt from the Black news channel.
So I just want to go on record again. I've already said this. This was back before the founders of the anti-soda hashtag cut me off and you know, whatever. The one phone conversation I remember having with Antonio Moore, this was exactly what I said. I said, why is Byron Allen? Because Antonio Moore talked about how he had been in discussion with Byron Allen and the billionaire, and why, in fact, to try to explain to me why I didn't understand economics or media, which I thought was interesting. But you know, and I said, but why doesn't Byron Allen, who I don't think is interested in these politics or whatever, and has the Griot as one piece of a smaller, you know, empire. But I said to Tone, why doesn't he fund the YouTube operation that you and Yvette have started? Financially, he would clearly be able to afford the basics to provide the kind of, you know, he could even probably provide a Roland Martin style studio. And the only response that I got was that I don't understand how any of this works. But my only point was, if but my point was that you can't fund and engage these media operations for the purposes of making money. So he would have to do it as the right wing does it, with an understanding politically. I'll make my money elsewhere, but my contribution to the broader political environment and maybe struggle is I'm going to fund a media outlet that can produce news and media content that supports the politics that I'm interested in. Now, again, I don't think Byron Allen cares about radical politics or even news necessarily. I think he's interested in attracting, in the case of the Griot, a relative Black audience for the purpose of advertising. But the Griot is certainly no left of center publication. So I've even argued this, when we put together BPM. Yes, we want to generate revenue. Yes, we want to grow as big as whatever. But my argument humbly is that we have to sort of do this for the love and as a side or an additional bit of work, because the idea that we're going to be able to make sustainable revenue as individuals, whether owners or contributors to the channel, I don't think is realistic. Our target audience doesn't have a lot of money. Advertisers don't support. I mean, look at our videos are constantly yellowed or red. And we're in a marketplace competing with a lot of options for any kind of other far more watered down politics. So anyway, the revenue we generate has to, I think, largely go to more production, more work, more organization of the space, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, for the political purposes that our antagonists are engaged in. So this idea that, anyway, there can be no economic competition, as I argue elsewhere as well. Sorry. All right, here we go.
Second thing is you were not big enough from a marketing standpoint. A lot of people said, I never heard of the Black News Channel. You didn't see billboards and commercial and digital ads. You didn't see a major social media presence. That costs money. So let me tell y'all what went on. Now, I did have some negotiations with them. When Bob Brilliante was co-CEO of the network, they approached me about hosting a show on the Black News Channel. We met here, did a conference call. We met here in DC. This is a true story, y'all. I've never told this publicly. People who know me personally, I've discussed this offline. They met with me and they wanted me to host a primetime show, 30 minutes, which first of all made no sense whatsoever. You don't host a 30-minute damn show. You do the whole hour. It's a 24-hour network. If you do a 30-minute show, you got to put another 30-minute show behind it. But that made no sense. So they wanted me to host a 30-minute show, and they were going to have Larry Elder follow me, and they offered me $85,000 to host a 30-minute show.
I rest my case.
And then they wanted me to...
I rest my case. I mean, this is what I'm saying. In terms of J.C. Watts's initial claim about what he was doing, about having a conservative, politically conservative, $85,000 a year to Roland Martin for 30 minutes to be followed by at least that much going to Larry Elder. So even if you saw Roland Martin as somehow a positive, progressive participant in this relative to Larry Elder, they meant to follow him up immediately with Larry Elder to again negate every single thing that Roland Martin might have contributed in some sort of potentially somewhat positive way. And then 85 grand. And then as you see here, Roland walks away from that easily. 85 grand a year for 30 minutes. Son, I definitely went into the wrong profession.
Utilize my social media, promote the network. I said, I'm not even responding to that offer. I'm sorry. I made $85,000 running Tom Jonas' website, blackamericaweb.com in 2001. Do you actually think after what I've accomplished over the next 18 years, I'm going to take $85,000? Hell no. So,
I hadn't even planned to do this, but there are these videos. I couldn't find them. In the mid 2000s, I was teaching a class on Black radio, and I showed these videos to my class. I couldn't find them when it was time to do the buying power book. I don't know what, I don't know, but the videos were, Tom Joyner had videos shot with what were supposed to be his audience, members of his audience. And the purpose of the videos was to show his advertisers how he could sell their products to his Black audience. And it was literally, it was as close to I mean, it was shockingly reminiscent of every form of blaxploitation or whatever you would have ever seen. And they were literally calling him Uncle Tom, his guests. His audience members literally say, he's like our Uncle Tom. So when he tells us to buy your laundry machine, we buy it. When he tells us to buy your dishwasher, we buy it. And as I did, discuss a little bit in the buying power book as it relates to Tom Joyner, his boss hold on a second. I wasn't even, this is just, oh, is it not showing up? It's not showing up, is it? Chrome has lost permission to, okay, now it doesn't have permission to, okay, all right, I'm not going to even get into that right now. So I just anyway, as I said here, as Joyner's sponsors have made clear, quote, ABC Radio Network signed Joyner in 1994, quote, when you have talent that has a loyal and dedicated audience, advertisers will pay a premium for that, says Trog Keller. We identified early on the urban marketplace as an underserved area. We focused on it because the buying power of African Americans is estimated at more than $572 billion. This is in 1994, is growing faster than the general market. Today, there's a waiting list to advertise on Joyner's show and associate with his events. Joyner has shown a flashlight on some of the ugly little secrets in our business, explains Deborah Gray Young, VP and Director of Media and Strategic Services for E. Morris Communications, which currently buys Joyner's show for Walmart. He has pulled the cover back. There are still marketers that don't understand the unique proposition of this segment and are always going to think that they can use mass media to capture the African American consumer. And at his peak, Joyner was said to be pulling in, quote, $14 million a year. So if that's the kind of money going around to bring Black audiences to Walmart and ABC, then of course Roland would have been in position to turn down $85,000 a year to do a 30-minute show. I just submitted a faculty salary report at Morgan State University. Let me tell you something. There is a truckload of full professors, associate, assistant, lecturer, and adjunct professors with tremendous publication and contribution records making far less than $85,000 a year, who would So anyway, I just thought that was just, but of course, that's okay. Let me just, I think the point is clear.
I told him I'm not taking that offer. And so I said, if y'all want to be serious, y'all come back and holler at me. So they never did. Prince Sale came in. They never called as well. And I was fine. I told them we're just fine here at Roland Martin Unfiltered, the Black Star Network. My employees have always gotten paid on time, never been late, not even 1 minute. And we've been in the black since the 14th month we've been in operation. So we're good. So they spend all of this money here beyond going linear. And then you talking about not going digital. When Prince Sale came in, I know Prince Sale very well. Years in National Association of Black Journalists. But he made some fatal mistakes. The biggest mistake, he hired way too many people at high salaries, and that caused them to have way too much money going out of the door and not coming into the company. You simply have to be able to control your expenses when it comes to your revenue. Otherwise, you're going to be DOA.
All right. So from here, I'm going to stop it there because from there, it's a much longer video. I think the link is already there, but I'll put the link in the show notes if it's not there already. You can watch the whole thing. Because there's another piece to this, because what he does, Roland spends a lot more time after this talking about how he, recycles old furniture, how he was frugal with his money to get the set that he has, how he told a woman who wanted $65,000 a year to walk because she was only going to be able to make 45 working with him, so on and so on and so forth. So on the one hand, I thought, well, we should just watch all of that, but really, but time and whatever. I don't have all day, but one reason why I don't want to do that is because I just would wanted to have done that so you could watch and see. Roland Martin almost contradict himself and make the point that I was trying to make a moment ago, right? In other words, even in a commercial operation where he's bringing in money again from Verizon and Toyota and whoever, and McDonald's, and I mean, we already talked about it. I mean, you saw remember the McDonald's gospel special he did at the end of last year. I mean, and somebody was in a full Ronald McDonald's outfit singing gospel it was almost like the Will Smith Chris Rock thing. I had to watch it. I was like, did I see what I just saw? Is that really happening on live TV? Anyway, but even with all that money, Roland Martin is still telling people that he claims are talented and deserving of more money that he's not going to pay them that. $45,000 a year. While I think right at or above the national average, and I just mean average for working salaries, is not a lot of money. So again, either there's maldistribution of the revenue that Roland Martin and others are bringing in, which is something I would always want to start with. Yes, there's unequal pay between black and white or whatever, but in these black spaces, HBCUs, media, otherwise, there's this great amount of maldistribution of the resources that exist. Because if Roland is scoffing at 85 a year for 30 minutes elsewhere, but unable to pay someone who deserves it more than 45,000, it seems to me there's a maldistribution of resources. So even in his criticism of BNC and saying that they were paying too many, too much, maybe Roland's doing the same thing if he's paying too many, too little. Or we have to get back to the argument that I think that I'm making, that yes, I understand people got to get paid, but when it comes to assessing the media and the journalism that is impacting our communities and the spaces in which we live and work, we have to understand that there is an ideological political purpose for them being there, that they are there to limit, and that they can only make X amount of dollars to the extent that they don't do that. So that's why I think what BPM is attempting here is really so important. And I recognize that we're attempting something that not a lot of people can do. So for instance, many people in these YouTube streets are leaning on the revenue that they can make through YouTube because they're not making enough elsewhere. Or they don't have gainful employment elsewhere. And I get that. And that's one thing. But that limits A, their ability to work in collectives, and B, what kinds of content they'll produce. Because nobody, even the best of the best operating on their own, even with these BPM related politics, they cannot make money. They're not going to make money for themselves or anybody else. It's just not going to do it. So they're either going to have to devolve into the Kanye, Kardashian, Will Smith, Chris Rock stuff, or they're going to have to accept a certain level, a certain cap on what they're going to be able to make. So those of us who want to produce media and journalism that we claim is supposed to move and inspire, and we're going to have to, and this is what I loved about from our last conversation with Jared and Brooke and Erica and Two Black, but that whole Journalism for Liberation and Combat series or symposium or workshop or seminar is important, if for no other reason. It's getting people into a conversation about what are we really going to do when we have a certain set of politics and we want to produce media and journalism to support those politics, but we recognize that there are going to be wild limitations put on that. So a lot of that was sort of in the ether around those conversations, which is important, because what Roland Martin is presenting here as an autopsy of the Black News Channel is suggesting that he has the answer. But that is Roland Martin's answer, is to lean more heavily, again, on commercial ad revenue, maldistribution, I would assume, I'm guessing, of those resources, or a recognition that there's going to be a certain cap, even at the level of politics he's doing, because in terms of the ad revenue he can generate. Because again, if he is not even able to pay someone that he was saying at some length deserved this improved salary, what is the potential then? What options would a Black News Channel have, or anyone else have? Very quickly, one other thing that he leaves out in his analysis, that is Roland Martin, is just demonstrated here in this model on how CNN makes its money. So when because and again, what Roland Martin ends up doing is he ends up talking a lot about how Fox, MSNBC, and CNN make a profit, and I showed you what those profits are said to be. One, of course, these are the three dominant news networks. They are, as others have pointed out, they are the mouthpiece of the federal government, the military-industrial complex, intelligence agencies, ad revenue, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, big pharma. Of course, they're going to be well-funded, even when they don't have large audiences. They can't be the standard against which anything competes or compares, especially when we're talking about Black media of any political stripe. And again, what Roland, I think, misses in his autopsy is that those dominant outlets exist not to generate the profit that they're generating, but to set the political tone. That's why they're also described as the left, the right, and the center politically. And as we've talked about here before, MSNBC has been shown to have like a 99% Democratic audience, Fox like a 99% Republican audience, and CNN is, 100% Democrat or Republican. I don't know, something like that. But the point is, they're talking to the segments of the society that the elite want to manage and to keep within what are considered to be the acceptable ranges of discussion and political engagement. So Roland is missing, his autopsy, I think, misses many of these more important critical media literacy analytical points. But I brought this up here because I just wanted to show that in this graph, CNN is generating revenue, not only in addition to what I've said, they're generating revenue in ways that cannot be duplicated in any meaningful way by some sort of competition coming from Black, brown, whoever, oppressed, whoever. So the dominant bubble here is advertising, obviously. When a brand wants to run advertising on CNN-owned channel, it must pay an advertising fee. This fee is likely to be significant. The channel is ranked second for primetime viewership in the United States. As we've seen here, just with BPM on YouTube, advertising is not going to generate the kind of revenue that would allow anyone to compete. It won't allow Roland Martin to compete. It would not have allowed the Black News Channel to compete. And this is why whoever was involved with that needed to be, again, willing to accept a financial loss for the political gain of having a voice. By the way, it's a CNN-owned channel. So whether it's CNN or Warner or whoever, again, it's part of a broader conglomerate extension that most people can't compete with. Most people do not have video-affiliated networks to distribute and capture revenue from shared content. Most people do not have cable. Again, that was a big problem with BNC. Cable subscriptions, even to the extent that they're still necessary, you're not going to get, again, a large audience wanting Black targeted conservative political content. And you're not going to have repackaged content to sell either. And what is not listed here, you're not going to have the military industrial complex and the federal government and whoever else paying you to put message force multipliers on your show. And then this leads me I mentioned this a little bit earlier, and this leads me just to the last point I wanted to raise here. About the funding models, the alternative funding models of what's supposed to be the left and alternative spaces. And this is honestly something that I don't know exactly what to do or how to circumvent the problem. We're obviously, again, even Roland Martin can't compete, but we farther to the left are not going to be able to compete with ad revenue, with targeting an elite, well-resourced base. So more of us are going to have to be willing to volunteer time or work at ridiculously low amounts of money, in addition to other things, to produce the kind of media and work we want to do or that we need. When you look at the funding sources of even some of our favorite alternative media, there is a serious problem of, again, not of targeting a base that doesn't have a lot of money, of producing content that's not going to attract corporate ad revenue, but being largely dependent on a singular benefactor. And I think this is more prevalent than many of us are aware of in these spaces, that a lot of our favorite media outlets really only have one benefactor. They don't have a large subscription base. They don't have a large, obviously, ad revenue or other revenue generating operation. And so the amount of Black or otherwise radical billionaires or 100 millionaires willing to again take a loss to fund these radical that's pretty low. And that's why we also see the limitations put on that media. Now, again, I personalize it maybe too much, and I complain maybe too much publicly about my time with the Real News Network, but this was the same problem there as well, where one rich white man in California largely determines the success or failure of an operation, and even determines the content of the media. That's not a sustainable model, and that's not something that I think can be duplicated in spaces like this. So again, I'll just stop here by saying it's really important that I think we've tried, and we are trying this Black Power media situation effort. I think it's important that all of you who see and hear this do whatever you can to support it, even if it's not financially. It is serious. Like whenever you like something or share something, that is helpful. So just simply doing that is big. And then, of course, if you can, I'm very excited about this. Now that we have this opportunity, go to blackpowermedia.org and get yourself some merch and support the show this way as well. But really, at the end of the day, the support is helpful, and we need it, and we want to do what we can with it, and to not duplicate the maldistribution problem, so that we can support as many people as we can to some extent, and then more importantly, for me at least, produce other content, fund other people to produce some of the content that we need done, because people need some money to do what they're going to do. That's what we're trying to do here. And yeah, anyway, so that's all I had on that. And I just wanted to share those few thoughts on what I saw in Roland Martin's Autopsy of BNC. But I think it was predictable that they weren't going to succeed, because from the jump, whether it's J.C. Watts's overt claim about wanting a conservative Black targeting news thing, or whether it's a billionaire football team owner wanting to make a profit, there's not profit. There's not going to be a profit in news, period, much less Black targeted news. Maybe somebody was convincing them that Black people have this buying power that they could tap into. Drop Squad is a classic film, not written by, but directed by, or directed by, I think he just produced it by Spike Lee, executive produced it. Or did he direct it? I think he just oversaw it. But I think it's a great movie, if for no other reason, the concept that there are people in the Black community who do need to be drop squatted. And, obviously I don't know if it's really helpful to abscond and what are they, extreme rendition Black people off the street and put them in cages and rehabilitation camps to radicalize them, but the underlying logic and I get it. And I know, Roland has always been a capitalist. I get it. I get it. Part of it is that I admit part of it is that we have a little bit of fun, and I have a little bit of fun of messing with brother Roland, and his Twitter game. He's vicious in those Twitter streets. So, but the reality is also that there is a sizable Black audience, relatively speaking, that watch him, and I think he's emblematic of a lot of the issues and that we talk about here. So that's it. But I'm not looking for anything more from him on that. Now that's interesting. I didn't think of it this way either, Ricky, but I think you make a good point. If they had paid him and two other people more than $85,000 a year for 1 hour, he might have gone on over there. And none of this would have, I'd like to go find it. When he was at Morgan at a convocation a couple of years ago, I was there live in attendance for that joint. And I don't have enough of the details to really go to. I don't remember them well enough, but this was before his latest, the rise of his latest media venture, but he seemed to place a lot of emphasis on having white corporate connections and friends, and his description of the potential for Black people entering the media environment, and this is just a couple years ago. No, I didn't heckle him. I did tweet. I was live tweeting what he was saying, and at one point, started to disagree with him because, at first, like a lot of you saying, like, I get who he is, and I wasn't expecting some Malcolm X speech, and he's very, and I get his appeal on some level because, before he started speaking, he comes in, he's dancing, he's doing a whole routine with the choir and the band and all this stuff. It's dope. I mean, it's dope. And it's the kind of thing you would want to see at an HBCU, and someone who was and a Black speaker who actually likes Black people. I mean, I get it. Like on that, at that level, it's appealing. He's, styling with the band and all that. It was dope. But then I just kept going, and I just kept watching what he was saying. And sure enough, predictably, all of his politics started coming out, and they're flawed. So I just started tweeting, and then he started responding to me on Twitter, almost from I think he was still at the event. And he gets vicious pretty quick. He's, he doesn't mess around. So and I was trying to, I wasn't trying to go to war. I was just saying I don't agree with that. And I don't think that's good advice, and that's not going to work. No, he isn't James Baldwin. But yeah, anyway, if he was on the BNC team, he would have had a different tune looking like, I mean, maybe the Jordan theme, he'd have been crying right now. I don't know. I actually think what he did is good, and what he's doing, good for him and his own argument. And even in demonstrating what we could be headed towards, in terms of, I'd love to see, BPM have a nice studio and all that kind of stuff, and be able to hire people and, whatever. But I get all that. And I think doing the independent thing, the digital thing, he's right about all of that. But again, as his website, as I've shown a number of times, it's still looking to promote this idea that Black people have buying power to attract ad revenue so that he can expand. Again, Verizon, Toyota, McDonald's. He's got those private, the private equity arrangement. What was it? Who was paying for that? Anyway, paid sponsors for his economic segments that come also from that Wall Street funding world. So I mean, he's but he does not make the argument that he was in disagreement with J.C. Watts and BNC over the politics. So. No. I would never, ever. That is funny. Plus, Roland got a low center of gravity. Don't sleep now. Anyway, listen, good people. I really appreciate you coming through. It's been 3 hours this morning. A lot of fun for me. I hope you've all enjoyed it. If you're seeing this live, thank you for coming through. If you're hearing this or seeing this later, thank you as well. We really appreciate you. Please do like, share, and subscribe and all that good stuff. And definitely, like my man Pierre says,
put it in the comments.
If you got something more to say, definitely want to hear it. And again, just thanks to all the guests that came through this morning. Thanks to, again, all of you for supporting the channel. And as Fred Hampton used to say to you, we say peace because we know you're willing to fight for it. Catch you tomorrow on the remix, all week on the remix, with the whole remix crew coming back. I'll be back again on Friday. We got a whole bunch more coming out. More stuff's going to drop today. Stuff's been dropping. A lot of interesting. I've been putting a lot of old interviews up on YouTube now, so please go check those out as well. And more stuff's coming, like I said, today and beyond, for me and the rest of the crew. So again, thanks everybody. Peace, because we know you're willing to fight for it. Catch you next time here at I Mix What I Like.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.